A young warrior, Jiro, stepped cautiously into the heart of the Amati tribe's village, thinking he was merely returning home to reclaim what was rightfully his. But instead of being welcomed by his people, he was met with cold stares and a warlord's wrath. The man who should have been chief was now an outsider, and the throne was in the hands of his ruthless half-brother, Sumi. What Jiro didn't know was that his return would set off a battle for not just the throne, but for the very soul of the Amati people. Little did Jiro know, in the shadows of the tribe, something far more dangerous than rival clans awaited him. In the depths of the Whispering Lake, a mermaid named Nia watched, her ancient power rising as the tides shifted. What began as a journey to claim his birthright would soon turn into a fight for survival against the pull of the sea, a fight that would push Jiro to the edge of humanity itself. The mistake that Sumi made when he underestimated Jiro would soon become the most costly error of his life. The question was, would Jiro survive the deadly forces both human and supernatural, or would he be consumed by the very power he sought to control? Before we dive into this epic tale, where are you watching from today? If you're hooked by this story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The moon hung low over the Whispering Lake, its silver light reflecting on the calm waters like a mirror. The air was thick with tension, a silence so deep it felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath. In the distance, the rippling of the lake's surface hinted at something more than just the wind, something ancient, something powerful. Jiro, the once exiled prince of the Amati tribe, lay motionless on the shore, blood staining the sand beneath him. His armor was cracked, his body bruised and broken. The battle had been fierce, his enemies relentless. But it was betrayal that had brought him here. His half-brother, Sumi, had sent assassins to end his life, to keep his grip on power secure. But Jiro wasn't dead. Not yet. His breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to move, his fingers twitching in the sand. The pain was unbearable, but something stirred within him, a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. His vision blurred, but through the haze, he saw it, a figure, gliding through the water like a ghost. It was a woman. No, not a woman. A mermaid. Her hair flowed like seaweed, and her skin shimmered in the moonlight, glistening with scales that caught the light like jewels. She swam closer, her movements graceful, almost hypnotic. Jiro's heart pounded in his chest, his mind struggling to grasp what was happening. The mermaid's eyes were an impossibly deep blue, as if they held the secrets of the ocean itself. She gazed at him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "You're not supposed to be here," she said softly, her voice echoing in his mind like a whisper from the depths. "But you are." Jiro couldn't respond. His body felt heavy, his thoughts slipping away as the mermaid's form blurred, becoming one with the night. He tried to speak, to beg for help, but his lips wouldn't move. All he could do was watch as she knelt beside him, her fingers brushing over his wounds. Her touch was cool, soothing, and when she touched his chest, he felt something strange, a rush of warmth flooding through him, like the tide washing over the shore. The pain began to fade, and with it, the darkness that had threatened to claim him. But there was a cost, he realized, something he couldn't yet understand. "You're lucky I found you," she murmured, her voice soft but carrying the weight of centuries. "But there's a price to be paid for saving a soul." Jiro's eyes flickered open, and for the first time since the ambush, he felt alive again. The mermaid's magic had healed his wounds, but it had also changed him. He could feel it deep inside, a tug on his very being, something ancient and powerful, like the pull of the ocean's tides. "Who are you?" he managed to rasp. "I am Nia," she replied, her smile enigmatic. "And I offer you a bargain." Jiro's head swam with confusion. He had heard legends of beings like Nia, creatures of the sea, old as the earth itself, with power beyond imagination. But he had never truly believed. Now, lying on the shore of the Whispering Lake, barely clinging to life, he had no choice but to listen. "I can heal your body, restore you to full strength," Nia continued. "In return, you must offer me something of great value." Jiro's mind raced. His people needed him. His tribe was in turmoil, and his half-brother, Sumi, was growing stronger by the day. He had to return to the Amati, had to claim his birthright. But at what cost? "What do you want?" Jiro asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nia's eyes glowed with a mysterious light. "Your soul," she said, her words carrying a weight that felt like the ocean's depths pressing down on him. "Bind yourself to the sea, and I will give you the strength you need to reclaim your throne. But you will never again walk the land as you once did. You will belong to the water, to me." Jairo's heart raced. The offer was tempting. The strength of the ocean could make him unstoppable. He could defeat his enemies, bring peace to his people, and reclaim his birthright. But at what cost? To lose his humanity, to be bound to the sea forever, was that worth the power? He didn't know. But he had no time to think. The choice was before him, and his future depended on it. "I accept," Jairo said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I will make the bargain." Nia's smile widened, and for a moment, it seemed as though the very air around them shimmered with the power of the sea. "Then your fate is sealed," she said, her voice both tender and terrifying. "The sea will give you strength, but it will also take from you. Beware, Jairo of the Amati, for the ocean is not as kind as it seems." Jairo felt a strange surge of energy flood through him, his body strengthening, his wounds healing completely. But along with the power came a deep, unsettling sense of change. He could feel it, deep within himself. The ocean's magic was not just healing his body, it was reshaping his very soul. He rose to his feet, steadying himself with the newfound strength in his limbs. His gaze locked with Nia's, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes, something old, something dangerous. "The bargain is struck," Nia whispered. "Now, you will rise as the ruler of your people. But beware, Jairo. Power has its price." Jairo turned, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. The future of the Amati tribe, of his people, depended on him. And now, with the power of the ocean coursing through his veins, he would return to his homeland. But the path ahead was dark, and the waters were treacherous. The battle for his throne was far from over. And the price of his power was only just beginning to reveal itself. Jairo's return to the Amati tribe was not the triumphant homecoming he had once imagined. He had thought the land would welcome him back with open arms, that the Amati would rejoice at the return of their rightful heir. But instead, he was met with suspicion, hostility, and resistance. The journey back had been long and perilous, and Jairo had never felt more alone. His warriors, loyal to him despite his exile, moved with quiet purpose through the dense forests that surrounded the Amati territory. The air was thick with tension, as if the very land knew of the blood that had been spilled over the throne, of the betrayal that had driven him into exile. Jairo's mind wandered to his people, the ones who had once called him prince. Would they remember him as the boy they had cast out? Or would they see him for what he had become, a man of strength, forged in the fires of battle and the ocean's magic? As the Amati village came into view, Jairo felt a mixture of dread and determination. He had come to reclaim his birthright, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. His half-brother Sumi, now the acting chief, would not yield easily. Sumi had always been ambitious, his eyes set on the throne from the moment their father, Chief Tola, had taken ill. And with Tola's sudden death, the position of power had become a prize to be fought over. Jairo's heart burned with the desire to bring peace to his people, to unite the fractured clans and restore the glory of the Amati. But the price of his power, the bond with Nia, hung over him like a storm cloud, ever present, ever threatening. "Stay close," Jairo ordered his warriors as they approached the village gates. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that came from the power within him. He could feel the ocean's pulse, the rhythm of the tides, guiding his every movement. The gates of the Amati village creaked open, and Jairo stepped forward. The once beautiful village had fallen into disrepair. Homes that had once stood tall and proud now seemed broken, as if the land itself had grown weary from years of turmoil. The people of the Amati wandered the streets like ghosts, their faces gaunt, their eyes empty. Sumi was waiting for him at the village square, flanked by a group of his loyal guards. The man who had once been Jairo's brother now stood before him as an adversary, his eyes cold and calculating. "Jairo," Sumi said, his voice thick with disdain. "I should have known you would return. Did you really think the people would accept you after all these years?" After all that has happened. Jeiro's gaze was unwavering. The people have suffered, Sumi. Our people. It's time for that to end. Sumi scoffed. And you think you can just walk in and take what is mine? The throne. The power. His eyes narrowed. You're nothing but a fool, Jeiro. A dead fool, if you're not careful. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sound of the wind rustling through the trees. The villagers watched from the shadows, their eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. They had lived in chaos for too long, under Sumi's weak rule. But would they be willing to follow Jeiro, a man who had been cast out and returned with nothing but a handful of warriors? I don't want your throne, Sumi, Jeiro said, his voice steady. I want our people to be free. I want to unite the clans. To end the suffering. Unite the clans. Sumi laughed bitterly. You think you can just march in and fix everything with your fancy tricks? You think your army and your new magic can change things? The Amati are mine. And you will never take them from me. Jeiro felt a flash of anger rise within him, but he held it in check. He couldn't afford to let his emotions control him, not now. The ocean's power pulsed within him, urging him forward. He could feel the tide rising, the storm beginning to churn beneath his skin. But he had to be patient. You don't understand, Sumi, Jeiro said, his voice calm yet full of authority. You are weak. And so are your people. They are afraid of you, just as they were afraid of me. But I can change that. I can make them strong again. Sumi's eyes flashed with fury. You think you're the only one who can lead. You think you're the only one who knows how to fight. Jeiro stepped forward, his movements fluid and precise. No, Sumi. I'm the one who knows how to win. With a swift motion, Jeiro raised his hand, and his warriors, led by General Tali's protege, Damba, spread out in a perfect formation. They had been trained in the ancient ways of the Basi, a warrior tribe known for their discipline and combat prowess. And now, they would show the Amati just how powerful they had become. Jeiro gestured, and his warriors shifted into position. The lion's claw formation, a deadly maneuver that allowed for overwhelming force to be applied from all directions, took shape in an instant. The guards around Sumi hesitated, unsure of what to do. The people of the village watched in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. It was clear that Jeiro's return had shaken the very foundations of the Amati tribe. You see, Sumi, Jeiro said, his voice carrying across the square. This is how you lead. This is how you win. Sumi's face twisted with rage. You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? You think the people will follow you? You're wrong, Jeiro. You're nothing more than a... Before he could finish, Jeiro raised his hand once more, signaling his warriors to stand down. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The villagers watched, breathless, as Jeiro stood tall, the weight of his decision to return heavy upon his shoulders. Sumi scowled, his fists clenched at his sides. You may have won this time, Jeiro. But this is far from over. I'll have you removed from here, one way or another. Jeiro's gaze hardened. Try me. With that, Jeiro turned and led his warriors away, leaving Sumi and his guards standing in the square, defeated for now, but far from broken. As they walked, Jeiro could feel the eyes of the villagers upon him. Some were filled with hope, others with fear. But he knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and filled with more battles, both within his own tribe and beyond. And all the while, Nia's voice echoed in his mind. You have made your choice, Jeiro. Now you must face the consequences. The night was heavy with the scent of rain, and the air hummed with the tension of what had just transpired. Jeiro had won his first victory in the village square, but it was a hollow one. The people had seen his strength, yes, but the true test was still ahead. He could sense the unease, the uncertainty in their eyes as they watched him. They were not yet convinced. As Jeiro and his warriors made camp just outside the village, his thoughts drifted to the bond he had forged with Nia, the mermaid who had saved him. The ocean's power thrummed within him like an endless tide, relentless and powerful, but it was no longer just a force of nature, it was becoming a part of him, creeping into his thoughts, into his very being. "General Tali will want to meet with you at dawn," Damba said, interrupting Jairo's thoughts. The young warrior's face was lit by the flickering firelight, his expression one of quiet respect. "She says we need to secure the borders. The rival clans will not sit idle for long." Jairo nodded but did not reply. He had known this moment would come. The power vacuum left by Chief Tola's death had sent ripples throughout the region. Other tribes, hungry for land and influence, were already eyeing the Amati's territory. And Sumi, with his newfound authority, would likely do nothing to stop them. The Amati needed strength, unity, and Jairo's leadership. Yet, in his heart, Jairo could not shake the feeling that he was walking a dangerous path. The power that surged through him, granted by Nia, was intoxicating. He could feel it in the way his senses sharpened, in the way his body seemed to move faster, with greater precision. But each time he used it, a cold emptiness settled deeper within him, as if the ocean was slowly pulling him under, threatening to swallow him whole. As the fire flickered and crackled in front of him, Jairo's mind wandered back to the days spent with the Basi, training under the watchful eye of General Tali. She had been like a second mother to him, teaching him the ways of the warrior, the art of strategy, and the discipline of battle. Her lessons had made him who he was today, the warrior prince who had the power to unite clans and bring an end to the chaos that had plagued his people for so long. Yet, even as he thought of her, he knew there were limits to her power. The Basi's way was one of strict order and unyielding discipline, but it was not the way of the ocean. The ocean was unpredictable, vast, and all-consuming. And Jairo was caught in its pull, a force he was only beginning to understand. Damba's voice broke through his reverie once more. "We've secured the northern passes. But there are rumors, some say the Yumo tribe has begun making alliances with the Zuna, the southern clan. If they join forces, we will be surrounded on all sides." Jairo stood, the weight of his new role settling on his shoulders. The time for hesitation was over. The Amati needed a leader who could protect them, a leader who would not falter. And if he was to be that leader, he would need to harness the full power of the ocean. "I'll meet with Tali at dawn," Jairo said, his voice firm, yet tinged with an uncertainty he did not fully understand. "We need to know where the Yumo stand. And we need to prepare." The warriors nodded, sensing the gravity of his words. As the night deepened and the firelight flickered lower, Jairo could not help but wonder what price he would have to pay for the power Nia had given him. The ocean's call was growing stronger, and the pull of the sea was becoming harder to resist. The next morning, Jairo met with General Tali beneath the ancient baobab tree at the center of their camp. The tree stood as a silent witness to generations of warriors, its roots deep in the earth, its branches reaching high into the sky. It was a symbol of strength, of endurance, much like the Basi themselves. Tali was already waiting for him, her piercing eyes scanning the horizon. She was a woman of few words, but her presence commanded respect. A warrior queen, as fierce as she was wise, and Jairo's mentor in the ways of combat. "You've made a powerful first impression," Tali said without preamble as Jairo approached. "But winning a battle is one thing. Winning a war is something else." Jairo nodded, his mind focused. "The Yumo tribe is our biggest threat. If they ally with the Zuna, we'll be caught in a vice. We need to secure their loyalty." Tali's eyes narrowed. "The Yumo are proud. Their loyalty is not easily won. You'll need more than just strength to win them over." Jairo's thoughts turned to Nia. Could he use her power to sway the Yumo? He knew that the mermaid's magic was strong, but he had not yet fully understood its scope. Would she help him in this? Would she support him in his efforts to unify the clans, or would she demand more in return? "I have an idea," Jairo said, his voice low but determined. "I'll meet with their leader, Vuna. I'll offer him something they've never had before." Tali raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Respect," Jairo said, his voice filled with conviction. "The Yumo have always been underestimated. I will show them that I am the leader they've been waiting for. I'll prove that I can bring peace to these lands." Tali studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're bold, Jiro. I'll give you that. But be careful. The Yumo are not easily swayed. And if you're not careful, you may find yourself in a trap." "I'll take my chances," Jiro replied, his heart beating faster as he thought of the future. The stakes were high, but he knew this was the only way forward. If he could secure the Yumo's loyalty, he would have the strength to face whatever came next. As Jiro set out for the Yumo tribe, he felt the ocean's power coursing through him. The waves of the sea whispered in his ear, urging him forward. But with each step, he felt a growing unease. The deeper he went into the world of magic, the more he felt himself slipping away from the man he had once been. Would he be able to resist the pull of the ocean, or would he become nothing more than a servant to the tides, bound to the sea forever? Only time would tell. The journey to the Yumo tribe was treacherous. The path was long and filled with dangers, thick forests teeming with wild animals, steep cliffs where the wind howled like the cries of the lost, and rivers that twisted like serpents, threatening to swallow up anyone foolish enough to cross them. But Jiro was undeterred. The pull of the sea in his veins urged him on, whispering promises of power and victory. Yet, even as the ocean's voice echoed in his mind, he felt a gnawing sense of unease. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. It was early in the morning when Jiro and his warriors arrived at the edge of the Yumo village. The air was thick with mist, and the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches reaching out like the fingers of unseen hands. The village itself was nestled at the base of a great mountain, its huts made from the bones of the earth, stone and wood, designed to withstand the harshest of storms. Jiro's heart pounded as he approached the village, his steps echoing in the stillness. He had prepared for this moment for years, yet now that it was here, he felt a flicker of doubt. Could he truly win the Yumo's loyalty? Could he convince their proud leader, Vuna, to join him in his quest to unite the tribes? As he entered the village, the Yumo warriors gathered around him, their eyes sharp and calculating. They were a fierce people, their skin dark as night and their bodies honed from years of living in the wild. They looked at Jiro not as a prince, but as a challenger, a man who sought to take what was rightfully theirs. At the center of the village, on a raised platform of stone, stood Vuna, the leader of the Yumo tribe. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face carved with the lines of experience and wisdom. His eyes, however, betrayed nothing, no fear, no respect, just a quiet wariness. Jiro approached him slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to be careful, one wrong move, and the Yumo would see him as nothing more than an outsider, unworthy of their alliance. "I am Jiro, of the Amati," he said, his voice steady. "I come to offer you an alliance." Vuna's eyes flickered with interest, but his face remained unreadable. "An alliance," he repeated, his voice low and gravelly. What would the Amati have to offer the Yumo, a tribe still reeling from the death of its chief? "What makes you think we would want anything from you?" Jiro took a deep breath, his mind working quickly. He had prepared for this moment, but the challenge was greater than he had expected. The Yumo were proud and independent, their loyalty hard to win. "I offer you respect," Jiro said, his voice growing stronger. "The Amati have long looked down upon you, as have others. I see your strength. I see your courage. Together, we can unite this land and bring peace to our people. I am not just a prince, but a warrior, one who understands what it means to fight for survival." Vuna's gaze flickered to Jiro's warriors, then back to him. For a moment, the silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Then, finally, Vuna spoke. "You speak well, Jiro of the Amati. But words are nothing without action. Prove to me that you are worthy of my trust. Defeat me in combat, and I will consider your offer." The challenge hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Jiro's heart skipped a beat. He had not expected this. Vuna was a seasoned warrior, a man whose reputation for combat was legendary. To face him in battle was no small task. But Jiro had no choice. He had to prove himself, not just to Vuna, but to the Yumo, and to himself. "I accept," Jiro said, his voice steady. The Yumo warriors parted to make space for the two men, their eyes fixed on the impending fight. The air was thick with anticipation as Jero removed his cloak and stood before Vuna, his muscles coiling like a serpent ready to strike. He had trained for this moment, but even so, he knew the odds were against him. Vuna was no ordinary warrior. The battle began with a flash of movement. Vuna lunged forward, his massive fist aimed at Jero's head. But Jero was faster, ducking and rolling out of the way just in time. The ground beneath him was wet from the morning mist, and the stones were slick, making each step more dangerous. Jero's body was still recovering from the injuries he had sustained in his ambush, and the ocean's power inside him was still foreign, unpredictable. Yet, as he dodged Vuna's blows and countered with his own, he could feel the magic awakening within him. The power surged, but it was not the clean, controlled strength he had used in battle before. This was different. The ocean's power was chaotic, wild, and it was starting to take over. Vuna was relentless, pressing Jero with a series of quick, powerful strikes. Each blow felt like it could crush him, but Jero did not back down. He had to prove himself, had to show the Yumo that he was worthy of their loyalty. With a roar, Jero launched himself at Vuna, using the strength of the ocean that pulsed within him. His movements were swift and precise, almost otherworldly. He struck Vuna's side with such force that the warrior staggered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But Vuna was not defeated. He recovered quickly, launching a counterattack that caught Jero off guard. The force of the blow sent Jero crashing to the ground, pain shooting through his body. For a moment, he lay there, struggling to breathe. The ocean's power surged within him again, this time in a rush, and Jero's senses sharpened. He could hear the water calling to him, feel the pull of the waves. He knew, without thinking, that he had to win. There was no other option. With a sudden burst of energy, Jero sprang to his feet and closed the distance between him and Vuna. This time, his strikes were faster, sharper, more in tune with the rhythm of the ocean. He used the power of the tides to propel himself forward, each movement flowing with the strength of the sea. In a final, decisive move, Jero brought his fist down onto Vuna's chest, sending the warrior crashing to the ground. The Yumo leader lay still for a moment, then slowly rose to his feet, his face painted with respect. "You are worthy," Vuna said, his voice gruff but filled with admiration. "The Yumo will ally with you, Jero of the Amati. You have proven yourself not just in strength, but in spirit." Jero exhaled deeply, his body trembling with the aftermath of the battle. He had won, he had earned the Yumo's respect. But as he stood there, he felt the weight of the ocean's power pressing down on him, threatening to pull him deeper into its depths. And as the waves whispered in his ear, Jero knew that his victory had come at a cost. The ocean was claiming him, slowly but surely, and the price of its power was becoming clearer with each passing day. Jero's alliance with the Yumo was secured, but the true cost of his power was yet to be revealed. As the sun set over the horizon, he found himself standing alone at the edge of the ocean, staring into the darkening waters. The mermaid Nia's voice echoed in his mind, a soft, alluring whisper. "You've done well, Jero. You are mine now. Forever." But Jero was not sure if he was ready to give up everything, his people, his tribe, for the ocean. The choice was becoming harder, and the tides were no longer something he could ignore. The moon hung low over the horizon, casting a pale light over the water. The waves whispered as they rolled gently onto the shore, their rhythmic sound now strangely comforting, almost like a lullaby. Yet, for Jero, the whispers had grown louder in his mind, calling to him with an urgency he couldn't ignore. The ocean was no longer a distant force, it had become a part of him, a living thing that pulsed within his veins. Jero stood at the water's edge, his feet sinking into the cool sand as he gazed out at the dark expanse before him. His mind was heavy with doubt, torn between the loyalty he felt for his people and the power that the sea promised. He had already given so much of himself to the ocean, his strength, his will, his very soul. Could he truly walk away from it now? He closed his eyes and felt the waves around him, the cold kiss of the sea on his skin. In the distance, he thought he saw a flicker of movement beneath the water, a shimmer that caught the light of the moon. It was Nia, the mermaid, her silver-scaled form rising from the depths like a ghost from the deep. "Jero," Nia's voice sang through the wind, soft but insistent. You've done well to bring the Yumo into your fold. But this is just the beginning. You have the power to rule all that you see, but to do so, you must embrace what you've started. The ocean is now a part of you. You cannot turn away. Jeiro's heart raced as he turned to face her, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had grown stronger under her influence, had seen victory after victory on the battlefield. The tides had been his ally, helping him defeat his enemies with an ease he had never known before. But with each victory, he felt something within himself slipping away. A part of him, the man he once was being swallowed by the sea's dark power. I can't just give everything up, Jeiro said, his voice thick with emotion. I am the rightful leader of the Amati. I can't abandon them. I can't abandon my people. Nia smiled, her eyes gleaming like the moon on the water. You misunderstand, Jeiro. I am not asking you to abandon them. I am offering you a power that no mortal can withstand. With my help, you can reunite the clans, bring peace to the land, and become a ruler that will be remembered for eternity. All I ask in return is your soul. Join me, Jeiro. Come to the depths with me, and you will have everything you've ever dreamed of. Her words were sweet, like honey dripping from the lips of a goddess, and for a moment, Jeiro felt the pull of her offer deep in his bones. Power. Glory. The sea's eternal embrace. But then, the image of his people flashed before his eyes, the children of the Amati, their faces filled with hope and trust. Could he turn his back on them for the sake of his own ambition? I'm not sure I can accept your offer, Jeiro said, his voice wavering for the first time. There's too much at stake. I've fought too hard to reclaim my birthright. I can't betray my people. Nia's expression softened, and for a moment, she almost seemed to pity him. You think you can hold on to your humanity, Jeiro? You think you can be both a king and a creature of the sea? The ocean has already claimed you. You cannot resist it forever. Jeiro shook his head, unwilling to give in. I am not a creature of the sea, Nia. I am a son of the land. I was born to lead the Amati, and that is what I intend to do. Nia's smile faded, and for a moment, the sea seemed to grow still, as if waiting for her next move. She stepped closer to him, her long hair flowing around her like a dark veil, her eyes fixed on his with a mixture of longing and frustration. You are a fool, Jeiro, she said softly, her voice like a hiss. You can never return to the land as you were. You are mine now, and there is no escaping the ocean's grip. If you refuse me, you will lose everything. Your people will fall, and you will be nothing but a shadow of the men you once were. Jeiro felt a chill run through him at her words, but he stood his ground. He could feel the ocean's power thrumming inside him, but he also felt the weight of his choices, the weight of his people's trust and the responsibility he had sworn to uphold. I will not give in, Jeiro said firmly, his voice resolute. I refuse to be your slave, Nia. I will fight for my people, and I will fight to reclaim my birthright. You may have given me strength, but I will not let it consume me. For a long moment, Nia said nothing, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. Then, with a sigh, she turned her gaze to the ocean. Very well, Jeiro, she said quietly. But know this, if you choose the land over the sea, you will face consequences. The ocean will not forget what you owe it. And with that, she vanished into the depths, leaving Jeiro standing alone on the shore, the weight of her words echoing in his mind. Days passed, and Jeiro's resolve remained unchanged. He had turned away from Nia's offer, rejecting the power of the sea in favor of his people and his birthright. But even as he walked among his warriors, preparing for the next battle, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, a storm, something far greater than he had ever faced. The Yumo tribe had joined his cause, their warriors now fighting alongside the Amati, but the land was still torn by conflict. Rival clans continued to encroach on the Amati territory, and whispers of betrayal were growing louder. Jeiro's enemies had not forgotten his rise to power, and they were willing to do whatever it took to bring him down. One evening, as Jeiro sat in his tent, studying the maps of the surrounding territories, a scout entered, breathless and wide-eyed. My prince, there is trouble, the scout said urgently. A large army approaches from the east. It's the Kaya clan. They're coming for us. Jeiro's heart sank. The Kaya were known for their savagery in battle, their warriors ruthless and without mercy. If they were coming, it meant that Jeiro's enemies had finally united against him. "Prepare the troops," Jeiro commanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. "We will not back down. We fight for the Amati, for our future." But even as he issued the orders, Jeiro couldn't help but feel the weight of Nia's warning pressing down on him. The ocean had given him strength, but he could not rely on it forever. The battle to come would test everything he had learned, every decision he had made. And as the moon rose higher in the sky, casting a cold light over the battlefield, Jeiro knew that the true storm was only just beginning. The Kaya clan's army was vast, thousands of warriors clad in dark armor, their faces grim and determined. Jeiro stood at the front of his forces, his warriors arrayed behind him in the lion's claw formation, a strategy he had perfected during his time with the Basi tribe. His heart pounded in his chest as he surveyed the battlefield, the weight of his responsibility heavy on his shoulders. But as the Kaya clan charged toward them, something unexpected happened. The air grew cold, and the sound of crashing waves filled the air, as if the ocean itself was responding to the call of battle. Jeiro looked to the horizon, and his eyes widened in shock. From the sea, a massive wave rose, its waters churning with a strange, unnatural force. The wave crashed onto the shore, sending a shockwave through the battlefield, and from its depths, the figure of Nia emerged, her form shimmering like a silver goddess. "You chose the land over the sea, Jeiro," Nia's voice rang out, cold and filled with anger. "Now, you will face the consequences." With a flick of her hand, the sea surged forward, and Jeiro's warriors screamed in terror as the waters rose to swallow them whole. The storm had arrived. Would Jeiro survive the wrath of the ocean? Or would he lose everything he had fought for? The answer would determine not just his fate, but the future of the Amati, and the balance between the world above and the depths below. The battlefield erupted into chaos as the waves, taller than the tallest trees, surged forward. The ground trembled beneath the relentless force of the water, and Jeiro's warriors screamed in terror as they scrambled to find shelter. The Kaya clan, too, was caught off guard, their formations falling apart as the sea consumed the land. Jeiro stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The sea had risen like a vengeful god, its waters crashing down with unimaginable power. Nia stood at its heart, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as she raised her arms, controlling the ocean like a puppet master commands their strings. "This is the price of your defiance, Jeiro," she called, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You cannot escape your fate. The ocean will claim you, as it claims all who dare to defy it." Jeiro's mind raced. He had never imagined that his rejection of Nia's offer would lead to such destruction. His warriors, his people, his birthright, were all on the line. The ocean, which had once been his ally, was now his enemy. But amidst the chaos, something within Jeiro stirred. The bond he had formed with the sea was not one he could easily shake off. He had felt its power before, understood its depths, and now, he realized he could tap into that power, without giving in to Nia's demands. "Fall back!" Jeiro shouted to his warriors, his voice cutting through the noise of the storm. "We will fight the sea. We will fight for our home." The soldiers, though terrified, rallied at his command, forming defensive positions against the rising tide. Jeiro felt a surge of energy within him, a power that was both his own and the ocean's. He reached out with his mind, calling to the waters, trying to find a way to control them without succumbing to Nia's will. The ocean seemed to respond to him, the waves slowing for a brief moment, as if testing his strength. Jeiro closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of the water, the ebb and flow. It was as if he had become one with it, understanding its currents and its depths. He could feel Nia's presence still looming, but he was no longer afraid. He had learned the ways of the ocean, and he would not be its puppet. With a shout, Jeiro thrust his hand forward, sending a wave of force into the ocean. The water parted before him, as if respecting his will. The soldiers around him cheered, their fear easing as they saw the tide slow. Nia's face twisted in fury as she saw what Jeiro had done. "You think you can control me," she snarled, her voice rising above the storm. "You are nothing but a mortal, Jeiro. You cannot hope to match my power. J-Ro stood tall, his eyes locked on hers. I may be mortal, he said, his voice steady and full of resolve, but I am also the son of the land. And no matter how deep the ocean's power runs, I will fight for my people. I will fight for my home. Nia's expression darkened, her fury evident in every line of her face. With a single motion, she called the full force of the ocean to her, sending a massive wave crashing toward J-Ro. The wave rose like a mountain, its crest threatening to swallow everything in its path. But J-Ro was ready. He raised his arms, channeling all the power he had gained from the sea and his own will. The wave crashed down upon him, but instead of being swallowed, he pushed back, the force of his power sending the water spiraling around him, as if he were commanding the very storm. For a moment, the world held its breath. The sea, the land, and the people stood still in awe of the battle unfolding before them. Nia, her face now pale with shock, took a step back. She had not expected this. J-Ro's defiance was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The ocean had given him strength, but it had not consumed him. He had mastered it, found a way to bend it to his will. I will not be your slave, Nia, J-Ro said, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. The ocean is vast, and I will use its power to protect my people, not to rule them. With a final, decisive gesture, J-Ro sent a shockwave through the water, sending the wave crashing back into the sea. The storm began to subside, the waves retreating as Nia's control over the ocean weakened. Nia's eyes burned with rage, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned away, her form dissolving into the depths, leaving only the calm of the water behind. The storm that had ravaged the battlefield faded into the distance, the sea returning to its natural rhythm. J-Ro stood panting, his body exhausted from the battle, but his heart light with triumph. He had defeated Nia, at least for now. But he knew that this was only the beginning. The ocean would not forget his defiance, and Nia would not let him go so easily. The aftermath of the battle was both a victory and a loss. The Kaya clan had been driven back, their forces shattered by the power of the sea, but the cost had been high. Many of J-Ro's warriors had fallen in the storm, and the land was scarred by the fury of the ocean. The Amati tribe, though victorious, had lost much in the fight. J-Ro stood among the fallen, his heart heavy as he surveyed the damage. The cost of power was becoming clear to him. The ocean had granted him strength, but it had also taken a toll. His bond with Nia was no longer just a tool to be wielded, it was a force that he had to reckon with, a force that had consequences beyond what he could control. As he walked through the camp, his mind raced. The warriors who had fought by his side looked to him for guidance, for leadership. They had seen him wield the ocean's power, and they respected him for it. But some of them had seen the cost, too, the way he had changed, the strange aura that now surrounded him. General Tali had been silent throughout the battle, watching from the sidelines, her eyes narrowed with concern. She approached J-Ro, her gaze steady but filled with uncertainty. J-Ro, she said quietly, what you did today, it was nothing short of miraculous. But you must understand, the ocean will not forget this. Nia will come for you again, and next time, she may not be so merciful. J-Ro nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. I know. But I cannot stop now. The Amati need me. My people need me. Tali placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. I know you are a man of honor, J-Ro. But you must understand the price of the path you've chosen. You may have defeated Nia for now, but the ocean is ancient, and it is unforgiving. If you continue down this road, you may lose yourself completely. J-Ro looked out over the camp, his eyes distant. I know. But I can't turn back. I've already come too far. As he spoke, a dark shadow fell over the camp. The sea was growing restless once more, and J-Ro could feel its pull, its call. It was as if Nia's presence was still lingering, watching, waiting for her chance to strike again. J-Ro's mind was in turmoil. The ocean had given him the strength to defeat his enemies, but at what cost? Would he lose himself to the sea? Would he become the very thing he had fought against? The answer lay somewhere between the land and the sea, between the people he loved and the power he had gained. but finding it would not be easy. Jiro would have to confront the truth of his own heart, and the future of the Amati would depend on the choices he made in the days to come. The days after the battle were filled with uneasy silence. Jiro had reclaimed his position as the rightful heir to the Amati throne, but the cost of that victory weighed heavily on him. The once proud tribe was now fractured, its people uncertain of their future. The scars of the war, both physical and emotional, were deep, and Jiro's leadership was now questioned not just by rival clans, but by those closest to him. General Tali's words echoed in his mind, "The ocean is unforgiving." He could feel the presence of the sea in his bones, its cold touch ever closer. At night, he would dream of Nia, her eyes glowing in the depths, calling to him, beckoning him toward the water. He could hear the ocean's voice in the wind, in the rustling of the leaves, in the quiet murmur of the river. It was everywhere. Jiro had never felt so torn. On one hand, the power he commanded was unlike anything the world had ever seen. But on the other, he knew that the price of that power was steep, and he feared that one day, the ocean would demand more than he was willing to give. The council meeting was held in the heart of the Amati village, beneath the massive baobab tree that had stood for generations. The elders of the tribe, along with the remaining warriors, gathered in a circle, their faces shadowed with concern. Jiro stood at the head of the circle, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His warriors were present, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Whispers of doubt had spread throughout the camp, and even those who had once looked to Jiro for leadership were now questioning his choices. "We cannot deny that you have brought us victory," Jiro, one of the elders, Ojo, spoke with a tone of hesitation. "But the cost of that victory is high. We have seen the power you wield, and we fear that the ocean may claim you fully, just as it has claimed so many before you." Jiro's eyes narrowed as he glanced around the circle. His gaze fell on his half-brother, Sumi, who stood to one side, his expression unreadable. Sumi had been silent throughout the discussions, his face betraying none of the emotions that churned beneath the surface. Jiro could feel his brother's animosity, even without words. "The ocean's power is mine to control," Jiro said, his voice steady but firm. "I will not let it consume me. I will use it to protect the Amati, to unite us, to strengthen us." Sumi's lips curled into a slight, mocking smile. "Protect us?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or control us? We've seen how you've wielded the ocean's power. It is not strength, Jiro. It is a curse. And the longer you hold on to it, the more you will lose." Jiro's chest tightened. His brother's words stung, but he refused to show weakness. He had worked too hard to get where he was. His people had suffered too much for him to give up now. "I am not the only one who has faced hardships," Jiro snapped, his voice rising. "The Amati were divided before I returned. I have united us. I have secured our future. I have fought for this tribe, and I will continue to fight for it." Tali, who had been watching from the back of the circle, stepped forward, her expression grave. "Jiro," she said quietly, "you cannot ignore the truth. The ocean is part of you now. And while that may have helped you defeat our enemies, it may also tear us apart. The sea demands more from you with every passing day. We have seen it in your eyes, in your actions." The murmurs of the council grew louder, and Jiro's gaze flicked to each face in the circle. His warriors, once loyal to him without question, were now uncertain. Some nodded in agreement with Tali's words, others shifted uncomfortably. "I do not fear the ocean," Jiro said, his voice resolute. "It will not claim me. But what if it already has?" Sumi's voice cut through the tension, sharp and cold. "What if you've already made your choice, Jiro? What if the ocean has already taken you?" Jiro's heart pounded in his chest as Sumi's words sank in. The suspicion in his brother's voice, the way he had phrased it, was it possible? Had he already given too much of himself to the sea? Sumi continued, his eyes gleaming with something darker. "I think it is clear that you've changed, Jiro. The warriors respect you, yes, but they also fear you. They fear what you've become. And I fear that it's only a matter of time before the ocean takes what it wants, your soul, your life, and everything else." Jeiro's hands clenched into fists. He had worked so hard, fought so long to reclaim his birthright, to save his people. And now, in the midst of his victory, his brother sought to tear him down. Enough! Jeiro shouted, his voice booming across the clearing. The council fell silent. I will not be swayed. I will not turn away from the ocean, and I will not let the fear of what might happen keep me from doing what I must. The Amati will stand strong. The Amati will rise, and no one, not even the ocean, can take that from us. But as Jeiro spoke, he could feel the truth of Tali's words stirring deep within him. The ocean was still calling to him, still pulling at him, stronger than before. The bond he had formed with Nia was undeniable, and he wondered how long he could keep resisting it before it consumed him completely. That night, as Jeiro lay in his tent, the weight of the day's events hung heavily on him. His heart raced as he stared into the flickering fire, the crackling embers casting shadows across his face. His warriors, once loyal and united, were now divided. His people, too, were growing restless. They had seen what he was capable of, but they had also seen the darkness that came with it. Jeiro stood up, his body aching from the battle, but it was not the physical pain that kept him awake. It was the weight of his choices, the burden of his destiny. He could feel Nia's presence, her call beckoning him from the depths of the sea. She was close, closer than ever before. And in that moment, Jeiro realized something he had not yet fully understood: the ocean had not merely given him power. It had claimed him, piece by piece. The more he resisted, the more he lost. He stood, looking toward the horizon, where the moonlight shone on the dark waters of the Whispering Lake. It was there that Nia waited. And Jeiro knew that soon, he would have to make a choice, to embrace the ocean and its power, or to reject it and risk losing everything he had fought for. The sea was calling him. And no matter how hard he fought against it, he knew he could never escape its pull. Would Jeiro finally give in to the ocean's call? Or would he find a way to reclaim his humanity and his kingdom? As the winds howled and the waves crashed against the shore, the answer was yet to be determined. The battle for the soul of the Amati had only just begun. Jeiro stood at the edge of the Whispering Lake, staring out over the dark waters. The moon's silver light reflected on the surface, casting an eerie glow on everything it touched. The waves lapped gently against the shore, but beneath the calm, Jeiro could feel the ocean's restless energy. It called to him, whispering in the wind, a soft and persistent murmur that gnawed at his thoughts. In the distance, the silhouette of Nia appeared beneath the surface, her long, flowing hair shimmering like liquid silver. Her eyes glowed with an ethereal light as she beckoned to him, her voice a haunting melody that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. The mermaid had saved him once before, and now she waited for him to return. Jeiro closed his eyes, trying to push the pull of the ocean out of his mind. But it was futile. His bond with Nia had deepened over the past few weeks. Every victory he achieved, every step closer he took to securing his rule over the Amati, the more the ocean seemed to claim him. And the more he felt his humanity slip away. His half-brother Sumi's words echoed in his mind. The ocean will take you. It already has. Jeiro had dismissed them as jealousy and fear, but now, standing here, he couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to them. Jeiro, a voice called from behind him. It was General Tali, her footsteps heavy in the sand as she approached. Her sharp gaze fixed on the lake, and she said nothing for a moment, as if sensing the weight of the moment. You've been here for hours. The warriors are waiting for you. Jeiro turned to face her, his eyes betraying the conflict within him. I cannot stop thinking about it, Tali. The ocean's power, it's too much. It's consuming me. Tali studied him for a long time, her weathered face softening. You knew the price of this power when you made your pact with her. The ocean doesn't give anything freely. And you've gained much, Jeiro. Too much to turn back now. But that doesn't mean you must lose yourself to it. I don't know if I can control it any longer, Jeiro admitted, his voice raw with uncertainty. I've done things I never would have done before. I've seen the way my warriors look at me. They fear me. I've become something different. Tali stepped closer, her hand resting on his shoulder. It's not too late to find balance. The ocean is a powerful force, but it is not the only power you hold. You are a warrior, a leader, Jero. You've led us through battle, and you've united the clans. You cannot let the sea claim you, or you will lose everything you've fought for. Jero swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled heavily in his chest. He knew she was right, but the allure of the ocean was hard to resist. He could feel its call, its promise of power and strength, but was it worth the cost? He glanced back at the lake, where Nia's figure lingered beneath the surface, waiting. He felt a pang of longing, of desire. He wanted her power, wanted to be the ruler he was destined to be. But what was the price of that power? Could he truly rule both his people and the ocean? Or was he destined to lose his soul in the process? Tali's voice broke through his thoughts. We've won battles, Jero. But the real war is not fought with weapons. It's fought within you. The next day, Jero gathered his warriors. The camp was bustling with activity as preparations were made for the next phase of the battle. The Amati had secured their borders, but the neighboring clans still posed a threat. Jero needed to solidify his power over the tribes and ensure that no one could challenge his rule. But as he addressed his warriors, he noticed the unease in their eyes. They looked to him with reverence, yes, but there was something else in their gaze, fear. Fear of what he had become. He lifted his chin and raised his hand for silence. The warriors quieted, their eyes fixed on him. The time has come, Jero said, his voice strong but laced with uncertainty. The Amati will not be ruled by fear. We will stand together, as one tribe, united against those who seek to tear us apart. We will show them the strength of our bond, and we will fight with all that we have. A murmur of approval spread through the warriors, but Jero's mind was elsewhere. He could feel Nia's presence, her eyes on him from the depths of the lake. The ocean's power surged within him, urging him to take control, to seize what was rightfully his. But what if it cost him everything? What if he lost his humanity in the process? As he finished addressing his warriors, Jero felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Tali, her face grim. The time to make your choice is near, she said quietly. You cannot live in both worlds. The ocean is a part of you now, but if you let it consume you, you will lose what you fought so hard to protect. Jero nodded slowly, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew she was right. The ocean's call was undeniable, but his duty to his people was stronger. He had promised to lead the Amati to greatness, to restore their glory, but at what cost? That night, Jero found himself once again standing before the Whispering Lake. The moonlight bathed the water in a silvery glow, and he could see Nia's form moving beneath the surface, her long hair flowing like tendrils of the night. He stepped closer to the edge, his heart pounding in his chest. The pull of the ocean was stronger than ever before, and Jero could feel it deep within him. The promise of power, of eternal strength, beckoned him forward. But he knew what would happen if he accepted it fully. He would lose his humanity, his connection to the Amati, and become nothing more than a tool of the sea. Nia's voice came softly, almost tenderly, from the depths. Jero, come to me. The ocean will give you all that you desire. You will rule as no man has ever ruled before. Together, we can conquer everything. Jero hesitated, his body trembling with the intensity of the moment. He could feel the power radiating from the lake, from Nia. He knew that this was his moment, the moment that would determine his fate. But as he stood there, he heard a sound, a voice, calling to him from behind. It was Tali. You must decide, Jero, she said softly. The ocean cannot save you. Only you can save yourself. Jero turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision before him. He could feel the ocean's power in his veins, but he knew he could not allow it to consume him. Not like this. With a final, steadying breath, Jero made his choice. He turned away from the lake, his eyes filled with resolve. The ocean would not claim him. Not yet. I will not be ruled by the sea, he whispered to himself. And with that, he stepped away from the lake, leaving Nia and the ocean behind, at least for now. The road ahead would not be easy, but Jiro knew that he had made the right choice. The war was not over, but he was ready to face whatever came next. As Jiro walked back to his warriors, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest sound of laughter. It was Nia's laugh, haunting and sweet, as though she knew something he didn't. But Jiro would not look back. The ocean could wait. For now, he had a kingdom to rebuild. And he would do it on his own terms. The days following Jiro's decision to distance himself from the ocean felt heavy. The weight of his choice clung to him like a thick fog. Though he had turned his back on Nia's call, the ocean's power lingered within him, like an uninvited guest, whispering in the recesses of his mind. His nights were filled with restless dreams, dreams of deep waters, of waves crashing against jagged rocks, and of a pair of glowing eyes watching him from beneath the surface. But Jiro refused to let fear sway him. He had made his choice. He would not be consumed by the sea. The Amati tribe needed him, and he would not allow anything, not even the ocean itself, to tear him away from his duty. His resolve would be tested soon enough. As Jiro's army prepared for the next phase of their campaign, word reached him of a looming threat. The coastal Yumo tribe, once a potential ally, had grown increasingly hostile. Their chief, Kofi, a proud and ambitious man, had refused Jiro's offer of alliance, and now, rumors spread that he had allied with the rival clans that threatened the Amati borders. The news hit Jiro like a storm. The Yumo tribe controlled valuable coastal trade routes, and their defection could be disastrous for the Amati. If they joined forces with the rival clans, it would be a blow Jiro could not afford to take. "This is the moment we've been waiting for," General Tali said as she strode into Jiro's tent, her face grim. "We cannot let the Yumo join our enemies. We need to strike before they can act." Jiro nodded, his eyes dark with determination. "I agree. We will march at dawn. But we need to approach this carefully. I will not risk the lives of my warriors on a hasty battle. We will offer them one final chance to join us, but if they refuse, we'll make them understand the cost of their defiance." Tali raised an eyebrow. "You're planning to offer them peace?" Jiro's gaze hardened. "I'm not offering them peace, Tali. I'm offering them survival. If they choose war, we will give them a war they'll never forget." The following morning, Jiro and his army marched toward the Yumo village. The air was thick with tension, and every warrior moved with the same quiet resolve. The time for diplomacy was running out. When they reached the Yumo village, Jiro called for a parley with Chief Kofi. The village was nestled at the edge of the coastline, the salty breeze carrying the scent of the sea. The sound of crashing waves was a constant reminder of the power that lay beyond the shore. Chief Kofi stood before Jiro, tall and proud, his dark eyes sharp with suspicion. He was a man of middle age, his body lean but strong from years of battling the elements and defending his tribe. His warriors, equally fierce, stood behind him, their eyes cold as they watched Jiro. "I've heard whispers, Jiro," Chief Kofi said, his voice low but steady. "Whispers of your growing power. Of your alliance with the sea. And I've heard enough to know that you are a threat to my people." Jiro's heart clenched at the mention of his bond with the ocean. He could feel it stirring within him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I am no threat to you, Kofi," he said, his voice firm but measured. "I only want what's best for our people. The Yumo tribe has always been strong, and together, the Amati and Yumo could secure a future that none of our enemies could challenge. But if you choose to stand against us, I will not hesitate to do what must be done to protect my people." Chief Kofi's lips curled into a smile, but it was not a friendly one. "You talk of unity, Jiro. But I've seen the way your warriors speak of you. You are no longer a man of the people. You are a puppet of the ocean." Jiro's pulse quickened. The accusation stung, but he refused to show weakness. "I am the leader of the Amati, and I will not let anyone tear us apart. If you stand with our enemies, then you stand against me. And you will regret that choice." Kofi's eyes darkened. "I've already made my choice. You cannot intimidate me, Jiro. You may have the strength of the sea at your back, but I have the loyalty of my people. And I will not bow to you." The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed as if neither would back down. But then Jiro stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "I don't want war, Kofi. But if you force my hand, I will have no choice." "You're making a mistake." Chief Kofi's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps, Jiro. But this is a fight you cannot win. I will make sure of it." And with that, the parley ended. That night, as Jiro and his warriors prepared for the battle that was now inevitable, he could feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The Yumo had rejected his offer, and now, there would be no turning back. He knew that this battle would not only determine the fate of the Yumo tribe but also the future of the Amati. As Jiro sat in his tent, alone with his thoughts, he heard the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. The sea called to him, its pull growing stronger with each passing day. He could feel Nia's presence beneath the surface, her voice a soft murmur in his mind, reminding him of the power she had offered him. But Jiro pushed the thought aside. The ocean's power would not control him. Not now. He looked up as Tali entered, her face drawn with concern. "Jiro, are you sure about this? We could still try diplomacy. We don't have to fight." Jiro met her gaze, his expression hard. "We gave them a chance. Now, we fight. We cannot let them challenge our rule. Not now." Tali studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then let's prepare. The war begins at dawn." As dawn broke over the horizon, the Amati warriors gathered in formation. The sun's first light cast long shadows over the battlefield, and Jiro stood at the head of his army, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The Yumo warriors lined up across from them, their faces set in grim determination. The battle would be fierce, and many lives would be lost. But Jiro had no other choice. He could not afford to show weakness. The future of the Amati depended on his victory. With a single command, the battle began. The clash of steel and the cries of warriors filled the air as Jiro led his men into the fray. The Yumo fought fiercely, their warriors skilled in the ways of the sea, using the terrain to their advantage. But Jiro had the strength of his people and the strategies he had learned under General Tali's tutelage. As the battle raged on, Jiro's warriors pressed forward, pushing the Yumo back. But even as the tide of the battle turned in their favor, Jiro could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ocean's call was growing louder, urging him to take control, to strike with all his might. But he resisted. At that moment, a sudden burst of energy exploded from the shoreline. Jiro turned just in time to see a familiar figure emerging from the waves. It was Nia. She rose from the water like a goddess, her scales glistening in the sunlight, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly power. The air around her shimmered with magic, and Jiro felt the full weight of her power in that moment. And then, the ocean spoke. "Jiro," Nia's voice echoed in his mind, soft yet powerful. "It's not too late. Join me, and together, we can end this war. I can give you victory, but you must choose. The sea will be yours." Jiro's heart hammered in his chest. The choice lay before him once again, his humanity or the ocean's power. What would he choose? The battle raged on around Jiro, but in that moment, all the noise faded into a distant hum. His eyes locked with Nia's as she emerged from the waves, her form more radiant than ever, the sunlight reflecting off her shimmering scales. The sight of her sent a jolt through his body, a reminder of the power she had offered him, the power of the ocean, the strength of the tides, the force of the deep that could sweep away any foe. But in that same instant, a darker realization settled within him. To accept her power meant to give up everything he had fought for, the people of the Amati, the very life he had worked so hard to rebuild. He could feel the ocean's whisper, gentle but insistent, calling to him like a lover's embrace, offering him everything he had ever wanted, unmatched strength, the ability to crush his enemies, the loyalty of the sea itself. But could he truly give in? Could he betray the very people who had fought by his side, trusted in his leadership? The bond he had with them, the connection to his tribe, to his heritage, it was more than just duty. It was a part of him. For a heartbeat, Jiro stood frozen, torn between the world he had known and the temptation of an all-powerful new existence. Nia's voice broke through his thoughts, calm but laden with the promise of power. "Jiro, you are mine now. The sea calls you, and with it comes victory. Take my hand, and together we shall rule the waves." The air around him crackled with magic, and he could feel the ocean's power rising beneath his feet, urging him to claim it, to take what was his. But Jero, deep down, knew that his soul was not for sale, not to Nia, nor to the sea. He shook his head slowly, his voice low and firm. "I will not abandon my people, Nia. I made a vow to them, and I will keep it. I refuse to be a slave to the sea." The mermaid's expression faltered for a moment, her face clouded with frustration. She had thought him to be hers to command, to manipulate. But Jero's defiance was like a rock in the ocean, unyielding and steadfast. "You fool," Nia hissed, her voice laced with venom. "You would choose these mortals over the power of the ocean. You have no idea what you are turning your back on." Jero stood tall, his gaze never wavering. "I know exactly what I'm turning my back on. I don't need the ocean's power to be strong. I have my warriors, my tribe, and my honor. That is enough for me." With a furious growl, Nia vanished beneath the water, her form dissolving into the waves, leaving behind only the sound of crashing surf. For a moment, Jero stood there, staring at the now empty shoreline, feeling a strange emptiness settle in his chest. He had rejected her, but a part of him still longed for what she had promised. The battle around him had not stopped, though. His warriors, inspired by his resolve, pressed forward with renewed strength. They had seen the sea goddess herself, and yet their leader had not flinched. Jero's refusal to bend to the ocean's will filled them with pride, and together, they fought with unmatched ferocity. The Yumo, on the other hand, were faltering. Their chief, Kofi, had seen the power of the sea and the magic that accompanied Nia's appearance. His warriors were shaken, their resolve weakening under the weight of the unknown. Jero called out to his men, his voice ringing through the air. "Now. Push forward. Let them see the strength of the Amati." The warriors surged forward, their battle cries echoing over the battlefield. The Yumo, caught between fear and confusion, began to retreat, their warriors scattering in all directions. The tide of the battle had turned in the Amati's favor. But Jero's thoughts were still consumed by Nia. Her absence left a strange void in his heart. Though he had rejected her, he could feel the pull of the sea growing stronger, calling to him like a siren's song. He had chosen his people, but in doing so, he had made an enemy of the ocean itself. Later that evening, as the last remnants of the battle faded into the distance, Jero stood at the edge of the shore, looking out over the sea. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky streaked with hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the distant rumble of waves crashing against the rocks. He had won the battle, but he knew that the war was far from over. The Yumo had been beaten, but other enemies remained, rival clans that sought to tear the Amati apart, jealous of their newfound strength. And now, Jero had made an enemy of Nia, a force of nature that he could not fully comprehend. Behind him, he heard the soft footfalls of General Tali approaching. She came to stand beside him, her presence a steady anchor amidst the turmoil in his mind. "You did the right thing, Jero," she said quietly, her voice steady. "You chose your people. You didn't let the ocean swallow you whole." Jero didn't respond immediately. He only stared out at the water, his mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. He had made his choice, but that didn't mean the path ahead would be easy. The ocean would not forget him. And neither would the enemies he had made by refusing Nia's offer. "I don't know if I made the right choice, Tali," Jero admitted, his voice low. "The sea, it's so powerful. And it wanted me. I could feel it, calling me. But I didn't want to give in. I didn't want to lose myself." Tali's gaze softened. "You didn't lose yourself. You chose to fight for something greater than power. And that's something that will make you a better leader than anyone who seeks the easy way out." Jero turned to face her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if the sea comes for me again? What if Nia doesn't let me go? What if she tries to drag me under?" Tali placed a firm hand on his shoulder, her expression resolute. "Then we'll face it together. You don't have to face this alone. You have your tribe, your warriors. And most of all, you have the heart of a leader. The sea may be powerful, but your strength is not something that can be drowned. Jiro smiled faintly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. Tali's words gave him some comfort, but he knew the true test was yet to come. The sea had shown him its power. And now, Jiro had to prove that his will was stronger. As the last remnants of daylight faded, Jiro made a silent vow to himself. He would fight for his people, for his tribe. The ocean could call to him, but he would never let it claim him. The Amati camp had been set up near the shores of the Whispering Lake, where the battle had ended in their favor. The warriors had gathered around the campfire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, their eyes still alight with the rush of victory. But the atmosphere was heavy with an undercurrent of unease. They had seen Jiro's refusal to accept the power of the sea, and some began to whisper doubts in the shadows. In the quiet corners of the camp, Jiro sat by himself, staring into the flames. His mind was far from peaceful. The vision of Nia's shimmering form, her eyes filled with both longing and fury, haunted him. He had made his choice, but it had come at a cost. The sea goddess was not one to forgive easily, and Jiro could feel the weight of her gaze even now. A soft rustle behind him broke his thoughts, and he turned to find General Tali approaching. Her expression was stern, but her eyes held a trace of concern. "Jiro," she began, her voice low. "There are whispers among the warriors. They're uneasy about your decision." Jiro sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "I knew this would happen. I can't help but feel that I've made an enemy of something much larger than myself." Tali crouched beside him, her gaze steady. "The warriors are loyal to you. But power like Nia's, it's hard to ignore. There are those among them who wonder if you made the right choice." Jiro shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't want power for the sake of power. I wanted to bring the Amati back to its feet, to lead them with honor. I thought that was enough. But now, I wonder if I made a mistake." Tali placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "No, Jiro. You didn't make a mistake. You chose what was right. But that doesn't mean the journey is over. You'll have to prove it to them. And to yourself." Her words carried weight, but Jiro's mind remained restless. He had won the battle, but the war within his heart had just begun. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jiro stood at the edge of the camp, gazing out at the vast expanse of the Whispering Lake. The water shimmered, its surface still and serene, but he knew that beneath it, there was a power, one that could be both a blessing and a curse. He had thought the battle was the hard part. But now, as he prepared to return to the Amati village, he felt the true weight of leadership pressing down on him. He had to unite his people, yes, but he also had to deal with the fact that Sumi, his half-brother, still ruled in his place. And that wasn't the only problem. A soft voice broke his reverie, and he turned to find Mara approaching. Her face was somber, her eyes reflecting the weight of the world. "I've heard what they're saying, Jiro," she said quietly, her gaze steady. "They doubt you. They wonder if you're still the leader they need. You've turned down the power of the ocean, and now they're afraid." Jiro clenched his fists, the tension rising in his chest. "I did what I had to do, Mara. I won't be swayed by whispers. I have a duty to the Amati." Mara nodded, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "I believe in you, Jiro. But you know as well as I do that not everyone will. Sumi will use this against you." Jiro's thoughts turned dark. His half-brother, Sumi, had always been ambitious, and Jiro knew that Sumi would not hesitate to exploit any weakness. Sumi had already seized control of the Amati when Jiro was cast out. Now that Jiro was back, Sumi saw him as a threat, not just to his power, but to his very existence. "I know Sumi will come for me," Jiro said, his voice low. "But I will not let him destroy everything we fought for. I'll return to the village, and I will show them what I can do. I will prove that I am the true leader of the Amati." Mara gave him a small, encouraging smile. "I believe you will, Jiro. But be careful. There are forces at play here that you don't fully understand." And they are not just human. Jiro nodded, but deep down, he knew she was right. The battle with the Yumo was just the beginning. There was a far greater war ahead, one that involved not only the Amati tribe but the very forces of nature itself. The sea, with its endless power, would not let him go so easily. And he had no idea what Nia's next move would be. As they journeyed back to the Amati village, the tension between Jiro and his warriors grew. Whispers of doubt and fear spread like wildfire, and though many were still loyal, there were others who questioned his resolve. Jiro could feel the divide growing wider with each passing day. When they finally arrived at the village, Jiro was met with silence. The people of the Amati stood in the distance, watching him with wary eyes. The air was thick with uncertainty. In the center of the village, Jiro saw Sumi standing with his advisors, his posture regal and commanding. His half-brother was dressed in fine robes, a crown of bone and metal resting on his head. He had not aged as much as Jiro had, and he still carried himself with the same air of superiority that had marked him in their youth. As Jiro approached, Sumi's eyes locked with his, a mixture of disdain and rivalry in his gaze. "You return at last," Sumi said, his voice cold and controlled. "I see the battle has been won, but what of your soul, brother? Did you bargain with the ocean's depths for your victory?" Jiro's fists clenched at his sides. "I did not make a deal with the sea, Sumi. I rejected its power, and I fought for what is right." Sumi's lips curled into a smile, though it lacked any warmth. "And yet, the whispers say otherwise. The sea goddess herself came to your side. What was it, Jiro? Power? Glory? Or did you sell your soul for something far darker?" The crowd around them murmured, and Jiro could feel the doubt festering. Sumi was a master at manipulating the people, and he had already begun to plant seeds of distrust. Jiro stepped forward, his voice firm and resolute. "I rejected the sea, Sumi. I chose to fight for the Amati, for our people. I will lead this tribe with honor, not with the promise of dark magic." Sumi's eyes gleamed with malice. "We shall see, brother. We shall see if your pride is enough to save you. But know this, the tide is turning, and you may not be as invincible as you think." Jiro stood tall, but in the pit of his stomach, a cold fear gnawed at him. The battle for the Amati had only just begun, and now, he had to face the true test of his leadership. Sumi would not back down easily, and neither would the forces that sought to tear him apart. As the crowd parted and the whispers of doubt grew louder, Jiro felt the weight of the ocean on his shoulders. Nia's presence loomed over him, a reminder that the power of the sea was never truly gone. It was still out there, waiting. And Jiro knew that soon, he would have to face it once more. The days following Jiro's return to the Amati village were marked by tension. The warriors, once loyal and fierce in battle, now watched him with a growing unease. Word had spread of his refusal to accept Nia's power, and Sumi wasted no time in fueling the whispers that circulated like wildfire. To the people of the Amati, power and strength were paramount. And if Jiro had turned down the very thing that could have secured their future, how could he be trusted? Sumi, ever the opportunist, had quickly cemented his position as the acting chief. The crown of bone and metal, symbolic of his claim to the throne, rested heavily on his brow, and he wore it with a sense of ownership that Jiro had never seen before. Sumi's eyes gleamed with a quiet malice whenever he saw his half-brother, his words carefully chosen to sow doubt and mistrust. It wasn't just Sumi's ambition that Jiro had to contend with. The sea, too, seemed to stir beneath the surface, restless and unpredictable. Nia's presence loomed like a shadow in his thoughts, a constant reminder that he had made a dangerous choice. Her promise, the power of the ocean in exchange for his soul, was a temptation he couldn't easily forget. And though he had turned it down, the sea's pull remained. The gentle lapping of the waves against the shore at night seemed to call to him, beckoning him to return to the depths. Jiro could feel it, deep within his bones, that Nia was not finished with him. He had made an enemy of her, and the ocean goddess was known for her patience. The wind carried whispers of the tides, of storms brewing beyond the horizon, of things beneath the water that no mortal man could fathom. The first signs of conflict came one morning, just before the sun had fully risen. Jiro stood alone on the edge of the village, gazing out over the waters of the Whispering Lake. The stillness of the water reflected the stillness in his heart. He knew something was coming, he could feel it in his bones, the same way the wind carried the scent of rain before a storm. The sound of footsteps broke the silence, and Jiro turned to see Mara approaching. Her expression was tense, her usual calm replaced with something else, something more urgent. "Jiro," she said quietly, "you need to hear this." She handed him a small scroll, sealed with wax. It was from Sumi. Jiro unsealed it with a sharp movement, and as he read, his face darkened. The letter was a declaration, one that left no room for doubt. Sumi was rallying the clans in a bid for full control of the Amati tribe. He accused Jiro of betrayal, of rejecting the very power that could have saved them all. "The sea goddess's influence has poisoned you, Jiro," Sumi wrote. "Your refusal to accept what is rightfully yours will lead to the downfall of the Amati. I, Sumi, now hold the future of this tribe in my hands. The people will follow strength, not false humility." Jiro crumpled the letter in his hand, fury rising in his chest. He had known Sumi would use every tactic at his disposal to undermine him, but this was a direct challenge to everything Jiro had fought for. Sumi was playing a dangerous game, and Jiro knew it. Mara watched him carefully. "He's rallying support, Jiro. He's not just going after your leadership, he's going after your very soul. The power of the sea is the thing he fears most. If you reject it, he believes you are weak. And he will not rest until you are either broken or gone." Jiro took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Then I will show him that my strength does not come from the sea, but from my people. I will fight for them, and I will fight for the Amati. I won't let him tear us apart." Mara nodded, but her expression was troubled. "You must be careful. The more you resist, the more dangerous he will become. And there's more at play here than just Sumi's ambition. The sea, it's not something you can easily escape from. Nia will come for you again, Jiro. And when she does, you will have to decide once and for all if you are truly ready to face the ocean's wrath." The tension in the village grew with each passing day. Sumi's influence was spreading like wildfire. The rival clans, smelling weakness, began to encroach upon the Amati's land once more. The warriors who had once fought beside Jiro now looked to Sumi for guidance, their loyalty fractured by fear and doubt. Jiro knew that time was running out. He needed to act, quickly and decisively, if he was to reclaim his birthright and save the Amati from the chaos that threatened to tear them apart. It was on the evening of the third day after reading Sumi's letter that Jiro finally made his decision. He gathered his most trusted warriors, those who had stood by him through thick and thin. General Tali, ever the strategist, stood beside him, her eyes scanning the faces of their men. "We must strike before Sumi consolidates his power," Jiro said, his voice steady. "We will go to his camp tonight and confront him. If we wait any longer, we will lose everything." Tali nodded, her face set in a grim line. "I will gather the warriors. But Jiro, there is something you must understand. This is not just a battle for the Amati tribe. This is a battle for your soul." Jiro's heart raced at her words. She was right. He knew that with each step he took, he was drawing closer to Nia, and that meant drawing closer to the sea's power. But he couldn't let that fear paralyze him. His people needed him, and he would not back down. The night was thick with the scent of impending rain as Jiro and his warriors made their way towards Sumi's camp. The path was treacherous, winding through dense forests and rocky terrain, but Jiro's determination drove him forward. As they neared the camp, they saw the flickering light of torches in the distance. The sounds of laughter and conversation reached their ears, and Jiro's grip tightened on his sword. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of the Amati. But as they entered the clearing where Sumi had set up his camp, something felt wrong. The air was still, almost too still, and Jiro could feel a strange pull toward the water. It was as if the lake itself was calling to him, urging him to step closer to its shores. Sumi stood at the center of the camp, flanked by his advisors and a few of his most loyal warriors. He smiled as Jiro approached, his eyes glinting with a mixture of triumph and malice. "So, you've come to reclaim what is mine," Sumi said, his voice mocking. You think the people will follow you, Jiro. You think they will follow a man who turned his back on the power of the sea. Jiro's voice was low, but it carried the weight of his resolve. I will not let you destroy the Amati, Sumi. I will not let you tear us apart with your lies and your ambition. Sumi's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. You think you can defeat me? You, who are weak in the face of true power. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Jiro's eye, a shimmer in the distance. And there, emerging from the water, was Nia. Her form was ethereal, her scales glittering in the moonlight. The sea goddess's eyes locked onto Jiro, and in that moment, Jiro knew that his choice had brought him to this very moment. The ocean was calling, its power reaching for him once more. And in the face of this ancient power, Jiro knew that the true battle was about to begin. The tension in the air was electric, a crackling charge that seemed to gather strength with every passing moment. Jiro stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes never leaving Sumi, but his thoughts constantly shifting between his half-brother's venomous words and the pull of the sea that Nia represented. Sumi's forces were arrayed before him, their weapons gleaming in the dim torchlight, and yet, in the back of his mind, Jiro could hear the distant lapping of the waves. It was a reminder that the true conflict lay not just between his tribe and Sumi's followers, but between himself and the depths of the ocean, with Nia waiting to claim what she believed was hers. Nia's presence grew stronger with each passing second. The ground beneath Jiro's feet seemed to vibrate with the power of the sea, and he could feel her gaze like a tangible weight on his chest. She was not a mere force of nature, she was something older, something that existed in the very bones of the earth and the deep currents of the sea. Her aura rippled through the air, a cool breeze that brought with it both the promise of power and the threat of drowning. Sumi noticed Jiro's distraction, his gaze shifting toward the shimmering figure emerging from the water. His lips curled into a wicked smile. So, the sea witch has come to collect her prize, Sumi sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. You think you can rule both the land and the sea, Jiro? You are nothing more than a puppet of the ocean's will. You're not a king, you're a pawn in Nia's game. Jiro's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, but the words that left his mouth were measured, controlled. I am not your puppet, Sumi. And neither am I Nia's. I came back to fight for the Amati, not to become some slave to the sea's whims. But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. He could feel the truth gnawing at him, a gnawing that spoke of the ocean's power and the bond it had already formed with his very soul. Nia's voice, soft as the whispering winds of the lake, broke the silence that hung heavy between the brothers. Jiro, she called, her voice dripping with both sweetness and a sharp edge, you have made your choice. You have turned away from me once, but you cannot resist me forever. Her eyes, deep pools of ocean blue, locked onto Jiro, and the weight of her gaze seemed to press into his chest like the weight of the sea itself. She spoke again, her words more insistent now, you belong to the ocean, Jiro. There is no denying it. You will come to me, whether you will it or not. Jiro felt the strength in her voice, the undeniable pull of the ocean's power. His skin prickled with the force of it, his heart pounding as though it, too, were swept by the tides. The pull of Nia's magic was overwhelming, and for a moment, Jiro felt his resolve falter. He could feel himself teetering on the edge of something vast and uncharted, a vastness he could neither comprehend nor escape. Sumi, sensing Jiro's momentary weakness, pressed his advantage. See. The great Jiro, the mighty warrior who once stood against all odds, is nothing more than a coward in the face of true power. His voice was mocking, but there was a tremor in it, a tremor of fear that betrayed Sumi's own anxiety. The air grew heavier, charged with the simmering conflict between the three forces. Jiro, caught between the gravity of his brother's hatred and Nia's allure, felt his mind split in two. Part of him wanted to step forward and claim the power Nia offered, to rule the seas with her at his side. The other part of him, the part that had fought so hard for his tribe, for his people, refused to succumb. The shifting currents. The night grew darker as the battle of wills escalated. The warriors on both sides stood at the ready, their swords raised, their faces grim, but none moved, held in place by the tension that gripped them all. It wasn't just a fight for leadership anymore, it was a fight for Jiro's very soul. Sumi's eyes glinted with malice, and his warriors murmured among themselves, waiting for their leader's signal to attack. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the weight of unspoken threats. Sumi, eager for the final confrontation, stepped forward, raising his arm to address his men. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying over the silent camp, "we end this. Jeiro's time has passed. He is a fool to have turned his back on his birthright and the power that could have made him a true king. He is weak, and the Amadi will never be free of the shadow of the sea if we let him rule." Jeiro's gaze flicked between his half-brother and Nia, whose ethereal form hovered at the edge of the lake, as though waiting for something. Jeiro's heart thundered in his chest as he stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. "Sumi, your hunger for power will be your downfall. I came to save our people, not to destroy them. You've let your envy blind you to the true enemy, the chaos that you are sowing within our tribe." Sumi's eyes burned with rage. "You dare lecture me about betrayal, Jeiro? You who would let the sea claim you like a pet? You are nothing but a weakling who seeks the easy path." Jeiro's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, but before he could respond, Nia's voice rang out once more, this time not as a whisper, but as a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. "You have made your decision, Jeiro," Nia said, her voice rising in power, "but know this, there are consequences to turning away from me. The ocean is not something you can simply walk away from. It is a part of you now, and it will claim what is rightfully its." Jeiro's gaze flickered toward her, and in that moment, he felt a cold, overwhelming sense of inevitability. He was tied to her, bound by the sea's power, and the more he tried to resist, the more it pressed against him. He could feel the waves crashing inside his chest, calling him, urging him to surrender. But something inside him, something that had been forged in the heat of battle and tempered by the love of his people, rose against the ocean's call. He could not give in, not yet, not when there was so much at stake. Sumi, seeing the conflict in Jeiro's eyes, bared his teeth in a vicious grin. He had no intention of backing down. The words of the sea which meant nothing to him, he only saw Jeiro as a threat to his own claim to power. With a sharp gesture, he signaled to his men, and the warriors rushed forward, their battle cries piercing the still night air. But before the battle could truly begin, the ground shook, a powerful tremor that sent the warriors stumbling. The air was thick with the sound of crashing waves, and the water of the whispering lake surged forward, rising in a mighty wave that threatened to engulf everything in its path. Nia had summoned the ocean's wrath, and the very earth seemed to tremble beneath her power. Jeiro stood at the edge of the lake, his heart racing as he felt the full force of Nia's fury. The sea had come for him, but it wasn't just for him, it was for everything he had fought to protect. Sumi's warriors staggered back in fear, their eyes wide with terror as the water surged forward, consuming the land around them. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Jeiro knew what he had to do. He could not fight both Nia and Sumi. He had to make a choice that would determine the future of the Amadi and of the ocean itself. His gaze shifted between the two forces, the sea and his brother, and in that moment, Jeiro knew that he was standing on the precipice of something much greater than any battle. This was a war for the soul of the Amadi, and for his own. The moon hung low in the sky, its silver light casting an eerie glow over the lake, which now mirrored the chaos unfolding on its shores. The water surged and crashed as if the very earth itself was at war with the sky. The sound of waves, once soothing, now became a deafening roar, calling forth a storm that was more than just a natural event. It was Nia's wrath, a power far beyond the reach of any mortal. Jeiro stood frozen, his heart torn between the forces that pulled at him from either side. To his left, Sumi rallied his warriors, fear in their eyes, but anger in their hearts. To his right, Nia's form shimmered, her features almost ethereal under the moonlight, her presence as commanding as the vast ocean itself. The power she wielded was immense, an irresistible force that seemed to seep into Jeiro's very bones. He could feel the cold fingers of the ocean clutching at his chest, tightening with each breath he took. His eyes flickered between the warriors of the Amadi tribe, the men and women who had once called him a prince, and the sea who had shown him a power that none of them could even begin to comprehend. The storm raged on, and Jeiro knew that the time for hesitation had passed. His mind flashed back to General Tali's teachings, the wisdom she had imparted on him when he was but a boy. A leader must choose the path that ensures survival, she had said. Not the one that offers glory or revenge. The tribe depends on you, Jiro. The tribe is everything. But how could he reconcile the lessons of leadership with the powerful call of the sea? How could he choose between the Amati and the ocean that had already claimed his soul? The betrayal. Sumi, emboldened by the confusion that the rising waters had caused, surged forward. "You've made your choice, Jiro," he shouted, his voice sharp and filled with venom. "You're no longer one of us. You've given yourself to the witch, and now you'll see what happens to traitors." With a roar, Sumi's warriors charged, their weapons raised high, but the crashing waves of the lake pushed them back, knocking them to the ground like toys in a child's play. The power of Nia was overwhelming, and for a moment, Jiro saw something in Sumi's eyes, something he had never seen before. Fear. Sumi, the once proud leader of the Amati tribe, now stood frozen before the tempest, his face pale, his hands trembling. His eyes darted between the waves and Jiro, and in that moment, Jiro knew that his brother wasn't just afraid of losing power, he was afraid of losing everything. Fear gripped Sumi in a way that was visible, raw, and desperate. But even as Jiro's heart ached for his brother, he knew what needed to be done. The Amati tribe could not survive with the chaos that Sumi's rule had brought. It was not just about power, it was about the survival of the people he had once called his own. "I never wanted to betray you, Sumi," Jiro said, his voice carrying over the storm's fury. "But you've made a choice too, one that will lead the Amati to ruin. I can't follow you down that path." Sumi's eyes blazed with fury. "You think you can save them? You, who have bound yourself to a creature of the sea. You'll doom us all, Jiro. The ocean isn't our friend, it is our enemy." With a growl of anger, Sumi lunged forward, but just as he did, a massive wave crashed over the shore, sending him and his warriors tumbling backward. The sea had spoken. And in that moment, Jiro knew Nia had made her choice too. She was no longer just a powerful ally, she was his judge, his executioner, and his salvation. The ocean was not something to be tamed, it was something to be respected. And Jiro had no choice but to accept its will. The storm continued to rage, but within its fury, Jiro saw a moment of clarity. He stepped forward, his voice calm and steady, but filled with the weight of his decision. "You are right, Sumi," Jiro said, his gaze unwavering. "The ocean is not our friend. But it is a part of us. It always has been. It is our past, our present, and our future. And if we are to survive, we must learn to live in balance with it." Nia's eyes flashed with approval at his words, and the waves began to calm. The water receded, pulling back from the shore like a breath held too long, until the only sound left was the soft lapping of the waves against the rocks. Jiro's warriors, who had been watching the scene unfold in silence, stood in stunned silence. They had never seen their prince so resolute, southwest sure of his place in the world. Sumi, still sprawled on the ground, slowly got to his feet, his expression one of disbelief. "So this is how it ends," he sneered, his voice bitter. "You side with the sea witch and forsake your people." Jiro shook his head, the weight of the world pressing down on him. "No, Sumi. I side with the future. With the survival of our people. If I must make sacrifices to protect them, then I will." But even as Jiro spoke those words, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The battle for the soul of the Amati was far from over, and Sumi would not give up his claim to power so easily. The storm had subsided, but the real storm was only just beginning. In the days that followed, the tension between Jiro and Sumi grew. The fractured Amati tribe was on the brink of collapse, with some loyal to Jiro, while others still followed Sumi's call. Jiro could feel the weight of the ocean's power pressing down on him, urging him to accept it fully, to become the ruler of both land and sea. But every time he felt the ocean's pull, he remembered the faces of his people, the warriors who had stood by him, the villagers who had trusted him. He could not abandon them, not when they needed him the most. Nia, however, was not patient. The bond between them had deepened, and she had begun to make her demands known. "You are mine, Jiro," she whispered one evening, her voice as soft as the waves. "You will rule the seas with me. Come to me, and I will grant you power beyond your wildest dreams." But Jiro hesitated. His heart ached with the pull of the ocean, but it also swelled with a fierce love for his people. He could not betray them, not again. Yet, the time for indecision was running out. The forces aligned against him were growing stronger, and soon, the day would come when he would have to make a choice between the land he had fought for and the sea that had saved him. The days that followed were tense, filled with restless nights and uneasy decisions. The Amati tribe, once united under a single banner, was now divided between two camps, those who supported Jiro, believing in his strength and vision, and those who clung to Sumi, desperate for the stability they thought he could provide. The warriors who followed Jiro were loyal, but they were few, and the weight of their numbers seemed to dwindle with each passing day. Jiro had retreated into the quiet of the forest, seeking solace away from the chaos of the tribe. Alone with his thoughts, he could feel the cold grasp of the sea reaching for him. Nia's voice echoed in his mind, sweet and tempting, urging him to come to her, to embrace his destiny as a ruler of the deep. But with every step he took towards the water's edge, the faces of his people flashed before him, faces that depended on him. The children who had played at his feet when he was young, the elders who had guided him in the ways of leadership, and the warriors who had fought beside him in the bloodied fields. Could he abandon them all for a power that wasn't truly his own? Nia's patience was wearing thin, and Jiro knew it. The ocean's tides no longer whispered to him with the same gentle caress, they now roared with urgency, as if urging him to make a choice. He could feel the change in the air, the tremor in the water that signaled a coming storm, one that would either drown him in its fury or grant him the power to command it. "I have given you time," Nia's voice whispered one night, carried on the wind. "You will come to me, Jiro. Or you will lose everything." Jiro stood at the edge of the Whispering Lake, the place where his fate had been sealed, his gaze lost in the vastness of the water. The moonlight bathed the surface, casting an eerie glow on the ripples that formed at his feet. He could feel the weight of the ocean in his chest, its depths calling to him like a lover who would never let him go. He could see her then, Nia, her form shimmering beneath the surface, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She rose from the depths, her body a mesmerizing dance of silver and blue, her voice like the lapping of waves against the shore. "You have kept me waiting, Jiro," she said softly, her voice echoing with the power of the sea. "But the time has come. You have learned the strength of the land, and now it is time to learn the power of the ocean. Come to me, and I will make you ruler of both. You will never need to choose again." Jiro's heart raced, torn between the temptation to give in to the promise of boundless power and the weight of the responsibility that still clung to him. His mind flickered to the memory of his father, Chief Tola, who had once been a wise and just ruler. Had he too been faced with a similar choice? Had he chosen the right path? "I cannot," Jiro whispered, more to himself than to Nia. "I cannot forsake my people." But as the words left his lips, he knew they were weak, uncertain. The call of the sea was too strong, too alluring. Back in the Amati camp, Sumi was growing bolder. His desperation for control had driven him to make alliances with rival tribes, including the treacherous Yumo tribe, whose warriors had always been a thorn in the side of the Amati. Sumi saw Jiro's struggle as a weakness, and he intended to exploit it. The news of Jiro's dealings with the mermaid, Nia, had spread through the tribe like wildfire, and it had not been received well. "Your brother has betrayed you," Sumi's voice rang out as he addressed his warriors. "He has bound himself to a creature of the deep. A prince who no longer understands the ways of the land. It is time for him to be cast aside. The Amati needs a true leader, one who will defend them, not one who will abandon them for the sea." His words stoked the flames of anger and fear in his followers. For them, the idea of a prince who would align himself with the unknown, with something so foreign and dangerous, was anathema to the very core of their beliefs. They had followed the ways of the land for generations, and the sea, no matter how powerful, was a force they could not control. Sumi's challenge was clear: if Jiro would not return to them, he would face the consequences. A battle for leadership was coming, and Sumi would not be content to stand by and watch as his brother grew more powerful. The next day, Jiro returned to the tribe, his mind made up. He had spent too many sleepless nights on the shores of the Whispering Lake, torn between the two worlds. He knew what needed to be done. The tribe needed a leader, and he could not allow Sumi to drive them into ruin. But as he approached the camp, he was met with the full force of Sumi's warriors, armed and ready for battle. Sumi stood at their head, his face hardened with determination. "You are a fool, Jiro," Sumi sneered. "The ocean has claimed you, and now you must pay the price. The Amati will not be led by a man who has forgotten his roots." Jiro's heart thundered in his chest as he stepped forward, his warriors by his side. He had come to reclaim his place, not just as a prince, but as a true leader. The time for hesitation had passed. The time for battle had come. "Enough!" Jiro shouted, his voice carrying over the growing tension. "This tribe was built on unity, not division. I have not forgotten my roots, Sumi. It is you who has abandoned them. You've turned your back on the very people you claim to protect." But Sumi would not listen. With a roar, he charged forward, his warriors following suit. The battle for the soul of the Amati tribe had begun. The sound of clashing swords filled the air, drowning out the cries of the warriors and the roar of the sea. Jiro fought with all the skill and power he had learned during his years among the Basi, his movements fluid and precise, a deadly dance that left no room for error. But his heart was heavy with the knowledge that this battle was not just for his survival, it was for the future of the Amati. Sumi fought with ferocity, his anger giving him strength. He had always seen himself as the rightful leader, and he would not allow Jiro to take that away from him. The two brothers clashed, their swords ringing out in the darkened sky as the storm began to stir once more. But even as Jiro fought, he felt the presence of the sea creeping into his veins, urging him to take the final step, to give in to the power that Nia had promised him. The temptation was unbearable, but Jiro knew that if he embraced it fully, he would lose everything he had fought for, the loyalty of his warriors, the love of his people, and the chance to lead them into a new future. With a cry of anguish, Jiro broke away from the battle and turned toward the lake. His warriors, confused and unsure, hesitated, but it was clear what Jiro was about to do. The moment had come. He could either choose the sea and its endless power, or he could choose the land, the people who had once called him their prince. Jiro stood at the edge of the whispering lake, his chest heaving, his mind torn. The battle behind him still echoed in his ears, the clash of swords, the cries of his warriors, and the anguished shouts of his half-brother, Sumi. The chaos of the fight had faded into a hollow silence now, replaced by the steady rush of the lake's waters. Nia's presence, though distant, lingered like a shadow. Her voice, soft yet commanding, beckoned to him. "Come to me, Jiro. You've already made the choice, don't turn away now." He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. His warriors, his people, his home, everything he had fought for hung in the balance. But the water whispered to him with a song he could not ignore. The tides pulled at his soul, promising a future unlike any he had ever known, one of endless power, immortality, and the protection of the sea. Jiro closed his eyes, the voices of his people, his tribe, and his half-brother swirling in his mind. He had always known there would be a cost to the power Nia offered him. But the thought of giving up everything he had worked for, the bond he had with the people who had once been his family, made his chest ache. The wind rose, sending ripples across the surface of the lake. Nia emerged from the water, her figure glowing in the moonlight. Her silver scales shimmered, her long hair floating around her like seaweed, twisting and twirling in the current. Her eyes, deep and infinite, gazed at him with a knowing, almost tender, look. "You cannot fight the tides forever, Jiro," she said softly, her voice like a lullaby. "The power of the ocean is part of you now. You will either embrace it fully, or it will consume you." Jiro took a step back from the water, the cold weight of the decision pressing harder on his heart. He looked over his shoulder, where the battle raged still. His people were waiting for him, expecting him to lead them through the chaos and restore peace. They had placed their hopes in him, and now they looked to him as their king. But Sumi had already proved he would stop at nothing to hold onto the power he had usurped. Jiro knew his half-brother would never let go of the throne willingly. Sumi would fight to the bitter end, and the Amati would bleed under his rule. He could not let that happen. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, Jiro turned back to Nia, the cold air biting at his skin. "I will do what I must," he said, his voice barely a whisper. His hand reached out toward the water, his fingers brushing the surface, and the lake seemed to respond, its ripples intensifying, moving in time with his heartbeat. "But if I accept your power, Nia, you must promise me one thing." Nia's lips curled into a soft, knowing smile. "What is it you desire, J-Ro?" "I want to save my people. I want them to be free from the chaos that Sumi has brought upon them. I do not seek power for its own sake. I seek peace. Can you grant me that?" The mermaid's eyes glowed brighter, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. Her voice filled his mind, like the sound of waves crashing against the shore. "The sea grants strength to those who seek it, J-Ro. But remember, the price of power is never without sacrifice. You will have what you desire, but it will come at a cost you cannot yet fathom." J-Ro did not flinch, though the weight of her words settled deep in his heart. He knew what he was asking for. The price of this power would not be small. But for his people, for his tribe, it was a price he was willing to pay. "I accept," he said, his voice steady despite the storm that raged within him. Nia smiled, a deep, ancient smile, and as she did, the water around J-Ro began to swirl and rise, enveloping him in its depths. He felt the ocean's power surge through him, cool, endless, and powerful. It wrapped itself around his spirit, linking him to the tides, to the creatures of the deep, to the very heart of the sea itself. It was a bond that could never be broken. When J-Ro emerged from the water, the world seemed different. The air was thicker, charged with the energy of the ocean. His senses were heightened, sharper. He could hear the waves crashing miles away, feel the distant pull of the tides beneath the earth's surface. The power of the sea flowed through him, a constant hum in the back of his mind. He knew now that he could command it, bend it to his will, but the thought brought no joy. The weight of his choice pressed on him heavily, and he understood what Nia had meant. The battle was still raging on the shore, and J-Ro could feel the discord among his warriors. The air was tense with uncertainty, but as he approached the camp, he could feel the power surging within him. He raised his hand, and the waters around him began to ripple with his will. The wind kicked up, sending dust and debris flying into the air as a tempest brewed at his command. "Enough," he shouted, his voice carrying with the strength of the ocean itself. The warriors stopped in their tracks, looking at him with awe and fear in their eyes. Even Sumi, standing at the front of his men, paused, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. J-Ro stepped forward, his eyes locking with Sumi's. He had never felt so certain in his life. "Sumi," he said, his voice deep with the power of the sea, "you have betrayed our people for the last time. The Amati will no longer suffer under your rule." Sumi sneered, his grip tightening on his sword. "You think you can defeat me with magic, J-Ro? You are nothing but a puppet of the sea." But as he spoke, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the power that J-Ro now wielded. The water surged up around him, forming a barrier of mist and foam that encased him like a living shield. His warriors, seeing the shift in power, rallied behind him, their loyalty unwavering. They knew, deep in their hearts, that J-Ro was no longer just a prince, he was a force of nature, a ruler chosen by the sea itself. The clash between the two brothers was inevitable. Sumi, consumed by his need for control, charged forward with a roar, his sword raised high. But J-Ro was ready. With a wave of his hand, the ocean responded. A torrent of water rose, swirling around Sumi, pushing him back. "You do not command the tides, Sumi," J-Ro said, his voice calm but full of authority. "You never will." But Sumi was not done. With a growl, he charged again, this time using the brute strength that had earned him respect among his followers. The brothers locked swords, their muscles straining against each other. For a moment, it seemed as if they were equals, but J-Ro knew better. The sea had given him strength beyond his brother's reach. With a swift motion, he broke free, sending Sumi stumbling backward. The tide rose with J-Ro's will, lifting Sumi off his feet and throwing him to the ground. "This is not over," Sumi growled, his eyes wild with rage. "It is," J-Ro said simply, his gaze hard as stone. "You have lost." J-Ro stood at the edge of the Amati village, looking out over the land he had once called home. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting a golden hue over the village, but it was not the beauty of the landscape that caught his eye, it was the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. The battle with Sumi had been brutal, but it had secured his place as the rightful leader of the Amati. His warriors, battered but resolute, now stood by his side, acknowledging his power, both as a prince and as the new ruler. The strength of the sea flowed within him, and he knew that his leadership would be tested in ways he could not yet foresee. As the days passed, Jiro found himself increasingly consumed by his duties. The leadership of the Amati tribe was no simple task, especially after years of chaos under Sumi's rule. The clans had splintered, their bonds fractured by betrayal, fear, and greed. Many of the elders still viewed Jiro with suspicion, seeing him as a foreigner, a man shaped by the Basi tribe, not the Amati. The people whispered in the streets, questioning his methods and his bond with Nia, the mysterious mermaid of the Whispering Lake. At night, Jiro would often retreat to the shores of the lake, seeking solace in the quiet waters, the only place where he felt the true weight of his power. Nia's voice would call to him in the silence, offering her guidance, her support. But each time he returned to the village, he felt the gulf between himself and his people grow wider. The growing divide. The tension between Jiro and his people was palpable. Though the warriors rallied behind him, the common folk were divided. Some saw him as a savior, the one who had brought peace and order to the chaos. Others feared the darkness that seemed to follow him, an unnatural connection to the sea, an otherworldly power that felt alien to the land they had fought to protect for generations. One evening, as Jiro sat in the council meeting, listening to the arguments of the elders, he could sense the unease in the room. The air was thick with distrust, each word spoken carrying a weight that was hard to ignore. "Jiro, you've won the battle," Elder Damo, an old and respected leader of the tribe, said with a heavy sigh. "But the people are unsettled. Your bond with the sea is unnatural. You speak of peace, but the people fear what you've become." "I have no choice but to embrace the power that has chosen me," Jiro replied, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "I fight for the future of the Amati. For our survival. But at what cost?" Elder Damo pressed. "The sea has claimed you, Jiro. You are no longer the same. You are a prince, yes, but you are also a creature of the ocean. We cannot follow a leader who is not one of us." The room fell silent at his words. Jiro's eyes flicked to the faces of the others in the council. They, too, were afraid. Not of him, but of what he had become. They had lived by the land for centuries, their customs and beliefs rooted in the earth, not the deep, dark sea. "I have always been one of you," Jiro said, standing to his feet, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I am your son, your brother, your leader. The sea is my ally, but it does not control me. I control it." But the words felt hollow. In the depths of his heart, Jiro could feel the pull of the ocean growing stronger each day. Nia's presence lingered in his thoughts, her voice calling to him in the quiet moments, urging him to embrace his true nature. As the days passed, it became clear that not everyone in the Amati was willing to accept Jiro's rule. Sumi's followers, though few in number, still held sway among the most stubborn of the tribes. These dissidents, emboldened by their hatred for Jiro, began to stir unrest. Secret meetings were held, and whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire through the village. Jiro had known this day would come. He had known that Sumi's pride would never allow him to accept defeat. But Jiro also knew that he had the power to stop it, if only he could balance the demands of his people with the pull of the sea. The question remained, could he control the tides of war without losing himself to them? One night, as Jiro prepared for bed, a messenger arrived at his door, breathless and wide-eyed. "My prince, there is word from the northern border," the messenger said. "A group of Sumi's men are gathering. They are preparing for an attack." Jiro's heart sank. He had hoped that Sumi would be content with his exile, but the bloodlust in his brother's eyes had never faded. "Prepare the warriors," Jiro said, his voice steady despite the storm that brewed inside him. "We leave at dawn." The war drums beat through the night, echoing across the village, calling the warriors to arms. As Jiro stood on the edge of the village, overlooking the horizon, he felt the ocean's power surge within him, urging him forward. The sea was restless, as if anticipating the coming battle. The battle was fierce and relentless. Sumi's men, though fewer in number, were fierce and determined. They fought with the desperation of those who had nothing to lose, their swords flashing in the moonlight, their cries echoing across the battlefield. But Jiro was ready. He had learned the ways of war from General Tali, his mentor in the Basi tribe, and now those lessons came to life. With a wave of his hand, the ocean responded. The earth trembled as waves rose from the shore, crashing against Sumi's forces with a power that seemed to come from the very heart of the sea. Jiro stood at the center of the battlefield, his warriors rallying behind him, their swords raised high. The sea was with him, its power at his command. With each wave, his enemies faltered, driven back by the overwhelming strength of the ocean. Sumi, standing at the front of his men, stared in disbelief. The power Jiro wielded was unlike anything he had ever seen. He had hoped to defeat his brother in battle, but now, it seemed, he was no match for the forces that Jiro commanded. Jiro! Sumi shouted, his voice full of rage. You have become a monster, a puppet of the sea. I will not let you rule over me. But Jiro's gaze was cold, his resolve unshakable. You were given the chance to lead, Sumi. You failed. It is time for the Amati to move forward. With a final roar, Jiro raised his hand, and the sea responded. The waves surged forward, enveloping Sumi's men in a maelstrom of water and fury. When the waters receded, all that remained were the fallen bodies of Sumi's followers. In the quiet aftermath of battle, the village of the Amati began to rebuild. The earth was littered with the remnants of a war-torn land, and the air still carried the acrid scent of smoke and iron. Yet, for Jiro, the blood of his enemies was no longer as tangible as the blood that ran through his own veins. The real battle was not against Sumi's forces or any other rival clan, it was against the force that he had allowed into his soul. He had won, yes, but the victory felt hollow. As Jiro sat on the throne once held by his father, Chief Tola, he could not escape the feeling that he was losing himself. The weight of his newfound power pressed on him like the ocean's depths. Nia's voice, once a soothing whisper in the back of his mind, now echoed louder, urging him to embrace his true nature fully. The magic of the sea was intoxicating, and every time Jiro used its power, he felt it sink deeper into his bones, into his very soul. It was a power that could make him invincible, but at what cost? His warriors, once proud of their leader's victories, now looked at him with growing unease. Whispers spread like wildfire, whispers of his strange behavior, his distance from the people, and the eerie changes in him. Jiro no longer felt the warmth of the sun on his skin as he once had. The sea, the cold embrace of the deep, seemed to replace the earth beneath him. His eyes were becoming too sharp, too cold. The more he relied on Nia's magic, the more the sea began to claim him, piece by piece. Jiro's closest allies, his most trusted warriors, began to notice the change. They saw how his eyes, once full of fire and ambition, now seemed lost, distant, as if he were staring into a world they could not see. They had followed him because he was the son of Chief Tola, because he had the strength to unite the clans. But now they were starting to wonder, was he still the Jiro they had followed, or had something darker taken hold of him? One evening, after a long day of meetings and disputes, Jiro found himself standing at the shores of the Whispering Lake once more. The moonlight shimmered across the surface of the water, casting an ethereal glow. Jiro's heart pounded as he approached the water's edge, feeling the familiar pull of the ocean calling him back to its depths. You've come again, Nia's voice broke the silence, as soft and soothing as the tide. Why do you hesitate, Jiro? The sea is waiting for you. Your power, your destiny, they lie in the depths. I am not sure I can do this anymore, Jiro murmured, his voice heavy with doubt. The people fear me. They whisper of what I've become, what I'm doing to them. I've won battles, but I feel as if I've lost myself. You are stronger than you realize, Nia said, her voice like a lullaby in the night. You've already made your choice. You took my power, and now you must take your place as a ruler of both the land and the sea. There is no turning back. Jiro stepped closer to the water, his fingers grazing the surface, feeling the coolness of the lake beneath his touch. "What is it you want from me, Nia? Why have you chosen me?" "Because you are the one who is destined to rule both worlds," Nia answered, her voice thick with ancient wisdom. "You, Jero, are the bridge between the land and the sea. With my power, you can bring about a new age for the Amati, for the world. But you must accept the price." "And what is the price?" Jero asked, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "You must forsake your humanity, Jero," Nia said softly. "You must rule the seas with me. The ocean will be your kingdom, and I will be your queen. Together, we will shape the future. But you will never return to the land of men. Your soul will belong to the sea." Jero's heart clenched. He had known that this was coming, but hearing it from Nia's lips made it feel more real, more final. He would never be the man he once was. The people would never look at him the same way again. And his destiny, his true destiny, lay beneath the waves, in a world that could never be truly his. "I don't know if I can do this," Jero whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of his decision. "I fought for my people, for the Amati. I wanted to bring peace, to rebuild our land." Nia's presence seemed to surround him, a quiet storm on the water. "You cannot keep one foot in both worlds, Jero. You must choose. The ocean will either be your ally or your enemy. The time for hesitation is over." As Jero stood at the water's edge, torn between the life he had known and the life that awaited him in the depths, a voice pierced the night air. A familiar voice, one he had not heard in weeks. "Jero." Sumi's voice echoed from behind him, filled with contempt. "You thought you had defeated me. You thought you could claim the throne, but you've only brought ruin to your people." Jero turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he faced his brother, the man who had once been his greatest rival, now a shadow of his former self. Sumi stood there, his clothes tattered, his eyes filled with rage and desperation. "You should not have returned, Sumi," Jero said, his voice cold as ice. "This land is mine now. You lost. Your followers are gone. Your time is over." Sumi laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You've lost more than you realize, Jero. The sea may have given you power, but it's also taken your soul. You're no longer a man. You're a monster. And I will expose you for what you've become." Jero's heart tightened. Sumi had always been a jealous, vengeful man, but now he saw something else in his brother's eyes, a desperation, a madness born of his own defeat. Sumi was not just trying to take the throne, he was trying to reclaim the pieces of himself that Jero had taken from him. The battle between them, it seemed, was not just for power. It was a fight for survival, a fight for their very souls. The moon hung high in the night sky, its silver light casting eerie shadows over the landscape. The air was thick with tension, as if the earth itself held its breath in anticipation. Jero stood face to face with Sumi, his half-brother, and the weight of their conflict pressed down on him like an immovable stone. The echo of Nia's voice in his mind seemed louder than ever, urging him to step into the waters of the Whispering Lake and embrace the power that awaited him there. "You think you can claim what was never yours, Jero?" Sumi sneered, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think the sea can protect you from me? From the truth of what you've become?" Jero stood still, unmoving, as his brother's words stung. Sumi's presence was like a shadow that had haunted Jero for as long as he could remember. But now, it felt different. Sumi was no longer just a rival for the throne, he was a man on the edge of madness, someone who had lost everything and was determined to take the world down with him. "You have already lost, Sumi," Jero said, his voice calm, though his insides churned. "The people have chosen me. The battle is over." Sumi's laugh was cruel and derisive. "You think they chose you? You think they care about you? No, Jero, they fear you. They fear what you've become. The magic of the sea has twisted you, made you something they cannot understand. And once they realize it, they will turn against you." Jero's eyes flickered toward the edge of the lake, where the water lapped gently against the shore. He could feel Nia's presence, an invisible pull that threatened to drown him in its depths. His hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, the cold metal a stark reminder of the humanity he was slowly losing. "Sumi," Jiro said, his voice low and measured. "I have not forgotten who I am. I will not let you destroy everything I've worked for. You think you can take the throne from me? You will not succeed. Not while I still breathe." But Sumi's face twisted in fury. "You are nothing but a puppet to the sea, Jiro. A tool in the hands of something far older and more powerful than you could ever comprehend. You will never be the leader you think you are. You're already a dead man, walking." Suddenly, Sumi raised his hand, and the air seemed to shift, heavy with a dark, dangerous energy. Jiro's instincts screamed at him to move, but it was too late. Sumi lunged forward with a speed that took Jiro by surprise, his blade flashing in the moonlight. The two brothers collided, the sound of steel against steel ringing out in the stillness of the night. Jiro's heart raced as he fought to keep his balance, his movements sharp and precise. The fight was fierce, each strike a testament to the years of training and hatred that had built between them. Jiro was no longer the boy who had been cast out, he was a warrior, a ruler, and he would not back down. But as the clash of weapons echoed in the air, Jiro couldn't ignore the voice that had taken root deep within him, the voice of the sea, the voice of Nia, urging him to let go, to surrender. "Let the water take you, Jiro," Nia whispered in his mind. "You are the son of the sea now. You are its king, and it will give you the strength to crush your enemies." Jiro's vision blurred as the power of the sea surged through him, his muscles trembling with the force of it. He could feel the water rising within him, coursing through his veins like a tidal wave, overwhelming everything else. His eyes darkened, his pupils narrowing as the magic of the deep took hold. In that moment, something inside him snapped. The calm, steady hand he had once prided himself on was replaced by something far more dangerous, a creature of the sea, ready to destroy all who stood in his way. Sumi hesitated for just a second, as if sensing the change in his brother. But it was all the opening Jiro needed. With a roar, Jiro struck. His blade cut through the air like a lightning bolt, the force of the strike sending Sumi crashing to the ground. The sound of his brother's body hitting the earth was sickening, and Jiro stood over him, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with the weight of the moment. "Jiro, please," Sumi gasped, his face pale with blood. "Don't do this. I'm your brother. We can still." But Jiro's expression was cold, his heart hardening with every word. He had no time for mercy. "Not now. You are no brother of mine," Jiro said, his voice a low growl. "You never were." With Sumi defeated, Jiro stood over him, his chest heaving with exertion, the taste of victory bitter on his tongue. His brother lay at his feet, blood pooling around him, the fire of defiance now extinguished from his eyes. Jiro's sword, slick with blood, gleamed in the moonlight, but in his heart, there was no joy in the kill. There was only emptiness. He turned away from Sumi's crumpled form, his heart heavy with the weight of his actions. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to grow louder in his ears, as though the ocean itself was calling to him, beckoning him back to the safety of its depths. But even as the sea promised him power, Jiro could not ignore the voices of his warriors, who had gathered at the edge of the camp, watching with wide eyes. They had seen the fury in his eyes, the way the sea had taken over him. They had seen what he had become. "Jiro," General Tali's voice broke through the tension, her tone sharp and filled with concern. "What have you done? This is not the men we followed. This is not the Jiro who stood by us in battle." Jiro turned to face her, his gaze steely. "I did what had to be done, Tali. He was a threat to everything we fought for. The people needed to see that I am their leader, not him." Tali took a step forward, her face filled with worry. "But at what cost, Jiro? You are not just fighting for the throne anymore. You are losing yourself. The sea has taken hold of you, and you're slipping away from us." Jiro's fists clenched at his sides. "I am not slipping away. I am becoming what I was always meant to be." "The ocean is not your salvation, Jiro," Tali warned. "It is a dark force that will consume you. the more you give in, the more you will lose yourself. And once you've lost yourself, there will be no coming back. Jairo's eyes flickered, doubt creeping into his heart. He had heard Tali's words, but the pull of the ocean was too strong. He could feel it in his bones, calling him to the water, calling him to embrace his destiny as ruler of the deep. But as he stood there, staring into the faces of his loyal warriors, he realized something that shook him to his core. Tali was right. He could not let the ocean consume him. He could not let himself become a creature of the sea. For the first time in a long while, Jairo felt a pang of doubt. His victory was hollow, and the price he had paid was too high. The choice he had made was no longer as clear as it once had been. The sea had given him power, but it had taken something far more precious in return. The weight of Jairo's actions hung over him like an oppressive storm cloud. The ocean's call still echoed in his mind, its whispers seducing him with promises of power and immortality. He could feel the cool, salty breath of the sea on his skin, the pull of its depths becoming stronger with each passing day. But even as the sea beckoned him, Jairo couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within him. He stood on the shores of the Whispering Lake, the waves crashing against the rocks with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic force. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and in the distance, Jairo could just make out the dark silhouette of Nia, waiting for him in the depths. Jairo, Nia's voice echoed through his mind, soft and sweet, like a lullaby. Come to me. Let go of the land, of the pain, and embrace what you were always meant to be. Jairo clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He could feel the power surging within him, the magic of the sea flowing through his veins, urging him to take the final step into its embrace. But as the waves lapped against the shore, Jairo's mind wandered to the people he had sworn to protect, the Amati, the warriors who had followed him into battle, and Tali, who had stood by him through it all. Tali was right, he whispered to himself. I'm losing myself. But even as the doubt settled in his heart, he could not deny the strength the sea had given him. With each victory, he had felt himself grow more powerful, more untouchable. The fire that burned within him, fueled by the ocean's magic, made him feel invincible. You've already made your choice, Jairo, Nia whispered, her voice now urgent. The sea is your destiny. The land will no longer serve you. You belong to the ocean now. Let go. Jairo's legs trembled as he stepped closer to the water's edge, his feet sinking into the soft sand. His heart raced, and the temptation was unbearable. But before he could step into the water, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Tali. Jairo, no, she said, her voice filled with fear. Don't do this. I've seen it in your eyes. I've seen what the sea is doing to you. You're not the same man anymore. Jairo's gaze hardened as he turned to face her, his mind clouded with a mixture of anger and doubt. You don't understand, Tali. You don't know what it's like to feel this power, to have the ocean at my command. I know what it's like to lose yourself, Tali said softly, her eyes searching his face for some sign of the brother and leader she had once known. But the sea isn't the answer. It's a prison, Jairo. It will trap you in its depths, and there will be no escaping it. You'll be nothing more than a shadow of yourself. The wind howled around them, and Jairo's mind wavered. He could feel the ocean rising in him, threatening to drown out Tali's words. But in that moment, something shifted. A memory of his mother, Lyra, flashed before his eyes, the woman who had raised him with love, who had taught him the value of humanity, of connection. And he remembered the pain of her exile, the loneliness she had suffered, and the sacrifices she had made for him. I'm not like her, Jairo whispered, his voice breaking. I can't be. Tali reached out, her hand gentle on his shoulder. You're not. You're Jairo, the son of Chief Tola. You're the one who has the power to unite the tribes, to lead them with honor. Don't let the sea take that from you. The wind seemed to still, as if the earth itself was waiting for Jairo's decision. He stood there, torn between the woman who had always believed in him and the call of the ocean that promised him everything. His mind raced, and for the first time, he felt truly lost. Nia's voice cut through the silence, sharp and insistent. You can't walk away, Jairo. You're mine now. Your soul is mine. The power is mine. Jairo's chest tightened. He could feel the cold, watery fingers of the sea clutching at his heart, pulling him closer to its depths. But as he stood there, he realized something else. The people, his warriors, Tali, they were his true strength. It was not the power of the sea that made him strong, but his loyalty to those he loved, his people, and his land. With a deep breath, Jairo turned away from the water. The pull of the sea was strong, but his love for his people, his desire to protect them, was stronger. I choose them, Jairo said, his voice firm. I choose my people. I choose the land. Tali's face softened with relief, and she stepped closer, her hand still on his shoulder. Then come back to us, Jairo. Let's finish what we started. But even as Jairo took his first step away from the shore, a shadow lingered in the water. Nia's voice, now filled with rage, echoed in his mind, sharp and bitter. You cannot escape me, Jairo. You belong to me, and I will have you. There is no turning back now. The moon hung low over the horizon as Jairo and Tali made their way back to camp, the weight of their decision still heavy on their hearts. Jairo's mind was clouded with thoughts of Nia, and despite his resolve to reject the sea's call, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a grave mistake. They arrived at the camp to find the warriors gathered in tense silence, their faces filled with uncertainty. Word of the battle with Sumi had already spread, and the tribe was divided. Some were loyal to Jairo, while others still saw him as an outsider, a man who had abandoned his birthright. Jairo's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. His warriors stood at attention, but there was a noticeable distance between them, a crack in the unity that he had worked so hard to build. Tali stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with urgency. We need to act quickly. The other tribes will not wait for us to settle our differences. We must unite and prepare for the coming war. Jairo nodded, his gaze hardening. We will. But we will do it as one people, not as divided factions. As he spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, regal woman with dark, flowing hair and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. It was Nia. I warned you, Jairo, she said, her voice smooth like velvet but laced with danger. You cannot defy me. The ocean's wrath is not so easily dismissed. Jairo's heart skipped a beat as Nia stepped forward, her presence chilling and powerful. The warriors around him began to murmur, unease spreading like wildfire. You chose the land, Jairo, Nia continued, her eyes locking with his. But you will soon see that the sea always claims what it is owed. The air grew thick with tension, and Jairo's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword. Tali stepped beside him, her eyes narrowed, prepared for battle. The warriors around them shifted nervously, but none dared to move. Nia raised her arms, and the ground trembled beneath them. From the depths of the lake, strange creatures began to emerge, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light that filled Nia's gaze. The sea had come to claim its prize. I told you, Jairo, Nia's voice was a low, seductive whisper. There is no turning back. And in that moment, Jairo realized the true extent of the war he was about to face, the war between the land and the sea, a battle that would test everything he had fought for and threaten to tear apart the very fabric of his soul. The warriors stood frozen, their eyes wide with fear as Nia's creatures surged forward, their forms rising from the water like monstrous shadows, their glowing eyes flickering with hunger. The air smelled of salt and the sea, thick with an unnatural chill that sent a shiver down Jairo's spine. For a moment, everything was still, silent, like the calm before the storm. Nia's voice was calm, but her words cut through the air like a blade. You cannot resist me, Jairo. I have waited centuries for this. You will fall to me, and with you, all of your people. They are mine now. Tali stepped forward, her stance strong and unyielding. We will fight for our home, for our land, and for our people, she declared, her voice ringing with resolve. We are not like you, Nia. We will not bow to the sea. The creatures from the depths hissed, their forms twisting and writhing as they emerged fully from the water, their scales shimmering in the moonlight like liquid silver. The warriors of the Amati tribe, though shaken, began to draw their weapons, their resolve hardening. They had seen battles before, but never one like this, never a battle with such strange, supernatural forces. Jiro felt a surge of power from the ocean, like an invisible force wrapping around his chest, tightening with every breath. The ocean wanted him. It wanted his soul, and the tide that was rising within him was stronger than anything he had ever known. The magic of the sea flowed through his veins, making his limbs feel as though they were imbued with strength beyond measure. But with that strength came something darker, the gnawing feeling that he was losing himself, that he was no longer the man who had fought for his people, but something else. You can feel it, can't you? Nia's voice slithered into his mind. The power of the sea. The magic that courses through you now. You're mine, Jiro. All of this tribe, this land, it will belong to me, to the sea. Jiro clenched his fists, the strength of the ocean inside him threatening to break free. But Tali's voice broke through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Jiro, listen to me. You are more than this. The land is your birthright. The people you fought for, they are your strength, not the sea. Her words, though small, anchored him. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I can't let the sea take them, Tali. I can't lose everything I've fought for. Then don't, she urged, her voice full of certainty. We'll fight together. We've always fought together. With Tali's words still ringing in his ears, Jiro's mind cleared for the briefest of moments. He was Jiro, the son of Chief Tola. He was the leader of the Amati. He was the one who had brought the people together, who had united the fractured clans and fought for the future of his tribe. Not the sea. Not the ocean. Jiro's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, the weight of his decision settling into his chest. He would not give in. He would not let the ocean claim him. Not when there was still hope for his people. The bond with Nia, no matter how powerful, would not define him. He would choose his path. Nia, sensing his defiance, laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. You think you can resist me, Jiro? You think you can stand against the power of the ocean? I think, Jiro said, his voice steady and filled with purpose, that the ocean will not have what it wants. With those words, Jiro stepped forward, his sword drawn. The warriors around him followed suit, their faces set with grim determination. This was it. The moment they had all been waiting for. The battle for the future of the Amati tribe, and Jiro's very soul. Tali raised her spear, her eyes locked with Jiro's. Let's do this, Jiro. Together. And with that, the battle erupted. The creatures of the sea charged, their jagged teeth gleaming in the moonlight, their claws reaching out to tear into the flesh of the warriors. The warriors of the Amati, despite their fear, stood their ground, their weapons gleaming with the fire of battle. They fought with everything they had, each strike fueled by the love for their homeland and the people they had sworn to protect. Jiro was at the front of the charge, his sword cutting through the air with a deadly grace. Every strike felt as if the ocean itself was guiding his hand, the magic coursing through him giving him strength far beyond what he had ever known. But even as he fought, he could feel the darkness creeping in, the pull of the sea wrapping itself around his heart. His every action was tinged with the cold, unyielding magic of the depths. As Jiro cleaved through the creatures, he caught a glimpse of Nia standing at the edge of the lake, her form radiant and terrifying. She raised her hands high, and the waters around them seemed to respond, rising in a massive tidal wave, crashing toward the battlefield. No. Tali shouted. We can't fight her like this. The tide will drown us all. Jiro's mind raced. There had to be something he could do. Something to stop Nia's wrath before it consumed everything he had fought for. The sea was her ally, but it didn't have to be his. With a deep breath, Jiro closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself, trying to pull away from the sea's influence. He focused on the memories of his mother, Lyra, the love she had shown him, the lessons she had taught him. She had never turned to dark magic, never succumbed to the ocean's call. She had fought with heart and soul, and Jiro could do the same. Jiro felt the magic stirring inside him, but this time, it was different. It was not the dark, cold pull of the ocean, but the warm, pulsing strength of the land, the strength of the Amati. He could feel his ancestors with him, their spirits rising up to guide him, and the magic of the earth answering his call. The tide slowed. The waters that had been rising with such fury began to recede, pulled back by the force of Jairo's will. The creatures of the sea hesitated, sensing the shift in the power around them. And for the first time since Nia had arrived, the sea's grip on Jairo loosened. Nia's expression darkened as she stepped forward, her voice a low, menacing growl. "You cannot escape me, Jairo. You will belong to me. You will fall." But Jairo, his heart filled with the strength of his people, stood taller than ever. "I will not fall, Nia. I will not give in. I choose my people. I choose my land." With that, Jairo raised his sword high, the blade catching the light of the moon. The air around him hummed with energy, a battle of wills between the magic of the land and the power of the sea. And in that moment, Jairo knew that this war, this battle for his soul, was far from over. But he would fight. He would fight for his people, for his land, and for the future of the Amati. And no force, no matter how powerful, could take that from him. The sound of crashing waves echoed through the battlefield, mingling with the clash of steel and the desperate cries of warriors. Jairo stood tall, his sword shimmering with the strength of his will, while the creatures of the sea seemed to hesitate, sensing the change in the air. Nia, though powerful and unyielding, was not invincible. The power of the earth was growing within Jairo, a force that surged from deep beneath the land, from the very bones of the Amati tribe. Jairo's warriors fought fiercely, their blades striking true as they held their ground against the monstrous creatures that crawled from the depths of the sea. But even as they fought with all their might, the sense of something greater, something more dangerous, loomed over them. The tide that had receded was still waiting for Nia to call it forth again. Nia's eyes locked with Jairo's, and for a moment, the world seemed to slow. Her voice, cold and venomous, echoed in his mind, "You cannot win, Jairo. You cannot hold back the tide forever. The sea calls to you, and you will answer. It is your destiny." Jairo shook his head, feeling the magic pulse within him, the call of the sea still beckoning. He felt the ocean's cold grip trying to pull him under, trying to consume him completely. But he also felt the warmth of his people, their strength, their loyalty, their hope, and he clung to it. "I am not yours, Nia," Jairo said, his voice a low growl. "I will never be yours." Tali, who had fought alongside him through countless battles, stood beside him, her spear held high. Her voice was filled with the fire of a warrior who had nothing left to lose. "Jairo, you're not alone in this. We fight with you, and we will never let you fall." The warriors of the Amati, though exhausted, rallied around Jairo. The bond between them was unbreakable, a force stronger than any magic Nia could summon. And even as the sea threatened to rise once more, the power of their unity held the tide at bay. But Nia was not one to be outdone. With a roar of fury, she raised her arms, and the waters around them began to churn, growing darker, more violent. The wind howled as if it too had been summoned by her magic, and the sea roared in response. The creatures from the depths surged forward, their eyes glowing with a fierce hunger. It was as if the ocean itself had come alive, a living, breathing entity that would not rest until it had claimed what it sought. Jairo's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the decision he faced heavier than ever. The pull of the ocean was strong, but the power of his people, their loyalty, their love, was stronger. He could not let them fall to Nia's will. He could not let the sea take everything he had fought for. With a sharp breath, Jairo stepped forward, raising his sword high. The blade gleamed with the power of the earth, the strength of the land flowing through him. "This ends now, Nia." Nia's laughter was cruel and mocking. "You think you can stop me? You think you can defy the ocean?" The air around them crackled with energy as the two forces, earth and sea, prepared to collide. Jairo could feel the tension building, the final moments before the clash. His warriors stood firm, their weapons drawn, ready to face the storm that was coming. And then, in a sudden burst of power, Jairo plunged his sword into the ground, the blade sinking deep into the earth. A pulse of energy shot through the land, spreading out in all directions, a shockwave that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The sea faltered. The creatures from the depths hesitated. Nia's eyes widened with disbelief as she felt the power of the earth pushing against her magic. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the tide had been turned, that Jairo's bond with the land was stronger than the ocean's call. But Nia was not one to give up easily. With a scream of rage, she raised her hands once more, summoning the full fury of the ocean. The water surged forward, a massive wave that seemed to swallow everything in its path. Jairo could feel the power of the wave bearing down on them, but he refused to back down. With a cry of defiance, he called upon the earth's power once more. The ground beneath him rumbled as he willed it to rise, to defend against the sea's onslaught. The earth responded, forming a protective barrier of stone and soil, a shield that held the wave at bay. But even as the earth fought to hold back the tide, Jairo knew that this battle could not be won with strength alone. The sea was relentless, its power infinite. To defeat Nia, he would have to face the darkness within himself, the very magic of the ocean that had been calling to him. Jairo turned to his warriors, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Hold the line. We cannot let the ocean break through." Tali nodded, her expression grim but determined. "We fight for you, Jairo. We fight for the Amati." The warriors held their ground, their weapons steady, their hearts unyielding. But the battle was far from over. Jairo knew that the true test would come when he faced Nia herself, when he would have to make the ultimate choice. The sea roared, and the wind howled, but Jairo stood firm. The power of the earth surged through him, and the magic of the ocean still pulled at his soul. He was caught between two worlds, two forces that would destroy everything if he allowed them to clash. And somewhere deep within him, he knew that to save his people, he would have to give up something precious, something that he might never get back. The question now was not whether he could defeat Nia, but whether he could defeat himself. The battle raged on, the air thick with tension and the clash of opposing forces. The sky was a swirl of dark clouds, crackling with lightning as if the very heavens themselves were torn between the earth and the sea. Jairo stood at the front lines, his sword still embedded in the ground, the earth pulsating with the power of his will. Around him, his warriors fought bravely, their faces determined and bloodied, but their spirits unwavering. Nia's power surged again, more violent than ever. The ocean heaved with fury, a massive wave rising higher and higher, ready to engulf everything in its path. The sea creatures, dark and monstrous, surged forward, their eyes filled with a hunger that could never be sated. It was as if the very ocean had become a living beast, intent on devouring all who dared stand against it. Jairo's heart raced as he felt the pressure building. The earth beneath his feet seemed to tremble in response, as if the land itself was afraid of the overwhelming power of the sea. He could feel the magic of the ocean pulling at him, trying to drag him into its depths. It was a cold, oppressive force, one that whispered promises of unimaginable power, of dominion over all things. But Jairo resisted. He thought of his people, of the warriors who fought beside him, of the land that he had sworn to protect. The sea might offer him power, but it could never offer him the love and loyalty of his people. It could never offer him a future. With a fierce cry, Jairo tore his sword from the earth, the stone and soil crumbling as the power of his will shattered the protective barrier. The sword glowed with the strength of the land, its edge sharp and gleaming with the promise of victory. He raised it high, his voice ringing out over the battlefield. "Amati, to me." Jairo cried. "We fight for our future. We fight for the land that gave us life." His warriors answered with a resounding cheer, their strength renewed by his words. They fought harder, fiercer, with the power of their ancestors flowing through them. Jairo's command was their command, and together, they were an unstoppable force. But even as the warriors rallied to his side, Jairo could feel Nia's presence growing stronger. She was near, her power reaching out to him like an invisible hand, pulling him toward the sea. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing as he saw her standing at the edge of the water, her body shimmering with the ethereal glow of the ocean. "Nia!" Jairo shouted, his voice filled with defiance. "You cannot win. The earth is stronger than the sea." Nia's lips curled into a wicked smile. "You still do not understand, do you, Jairo? The sea is eternal. It is not something you can defeat. You will never be able to fight it, no matter how strong you are. Jairo's gaze hardened as he took a step forward. I do not fight the sea, Nia. I fight for my people. And that is what makes me stronger than you. Nia's smile faltered for the briefest moment, and in that instant, Jairo saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was not invincible. She was not as powerful as she had seemed. She was vulnerable, just like him. With a roar of defiance, Jairo charged toward Nia, his sword raised high. The ground trembled beneath his feet, the earth itself seeming to respond to his call. He was not fighting against the ocean anymore. He was fighting for his people, for the land, for everything that he held dear. Nia raised her arms, summoning the full force of the ocean. The waves surged forward, crashing against the land, attempting to swallow Jairo whole. But Jairo was no longer afraid. He had embraced his destiny as the protector of the Amati, the guardian of the land. He leaped forward, his sword slashing through the air with the force of a storm. The blade struck Nia's magic, sending a shockwave of power rippling through the water. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a deafening crash, the wave shattered, the sea recoiling as if it had been struck by an invisible force. Nia's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, Jairo saw fear in her gaze. She staggered back, her hands trembling as the ocean around her began to wane, the tide retreating in the face of Jairo's overwhelming power. You cannot control what you do not understand, Nia, Jairo said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of years of struggle. The sea may be vast, but it is not greater than the will of the land, the will of my people. Nia's expression twisted in fury, her mouth curling into a snarl. You are a fool, Jairo, she hissed. You think you can defy the sea, the very force that birthed you. You will regret this. With a sudden, explosive movement, Nia lashed out, her magic surging once more. But this time, Jairo was ready. He summoned the full strength of the earth, his sword glowing brighter than ever before as he held it out before him, a shield against the waves. The ocean struck him, but this time, it was different. The power of the sea clashed against the earth, and in that clash, the very fabric of their magic was torn. The water receded, the creatures of the deep retreating into the abyss from which they had come. Nia let out a final, anguished cry as she was forced back by the power of the land. The waves fell silent, the storm subsiding as the sea withdrew, leaving behind only the faintest echo of its presence. Jairo stood, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. He had won. But at what cost? The battlefield was silent. His warriors stood in stunned awe, their eyes fixed on him. The warriors of the Amati had triumphed, but the cost of their victory was yet to be seen. Jairo turned to face the land, the familiar hills of his homeland stretching out before him. The sun was rising, casting a warm golden light over the land. He had reclaimed his birthright. But as he looked at the horizon, he knew that the future was uncertain. Nia was gone for now, but the ocean would always be there, waiting. And Jairo had made a choice that would change him forever. He had saved his people, but he had also crossed a line, one that could never be undone. The balance between the earth and the sea had been broken, and with it, the path ahead was unclear. As Jairo stood at the edge of the battlefield, his sword still in hand, he realized that the greatest challenge was not the battle that had just ended, but the one that was yet to come, the battle within himself. Jairo stood alone on the battlefield, the sun casting its first golden rays over the land. His warriors were beginning to regroup, their cheers echoing in the distance, but he couldn't shake the heavy weight in his chest. The victory against Nia had come at a cost, one that he could not yet fully comprehend. The ocean's magic had woven itself into his soul, and with it, the whispers of the waves followed him like an unshakable shadow. As his people rejoiced, Jairo's mind wandered back to the moment of his victory. When the ocean had retreated, leaving only the faint scent of salt in the air, he had felt something stir within him, an ancient power that seemed to pulse from the depths of the sea. Nia had spoken of the sea's eternal nature, of its power to consume, to control. And in that moment, Jairo had realized that, despite his triumph, he had not fully defeated the ocean, he had merely struck a temporary blow. His connection to Nia's magic had left a mark on him, one that could never be erased. The sea had taken something from him, something vital, and in return, it had given him power, a power that he could feel coursing through his veins, both exhilarating and terrifying. Behind him, General Tali approached, her steady footsteps breaking the silence. She had been his mentor, his guide, and though she had always seen him as her equal, there was a hint of concern in her eyes now. "Jero," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What happened back there? That wasn't just a victory. You've changed." Jero turned slowly, his face etched with uncertainty. "I did what I had to do, Tali. We fought for our people, and we won. The Amati are safe." Tali nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "But at what cost? The sea is not something to be trifled with. You've made a pact with it, whether you realize it or not. You've taken its power, and now it will claim what it is owed." Jero's heart clenched at her words. He had known that the ocean's power would come with a price, but he hadn't fully understood the depth of that cost. The sea had offered him victory, but it had also bound him to its will. Nia's last words echoed in his mind, "You will regret this." "Will I?" Jero asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I've already lost so much, Tali. I was exiled from my homeland, forced to fight for my life. I've reclaimed everything I've lost, and now my people are safe." Tali stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Safety comes at a price, Jero. The ocean's magic is seductive. It promises power, but it demands loyalty. And that loyalty will drag you down, whether you want it to or not." Jero clenched his fists, frustration bubbling within him. "I won't let it control me. I will not become Nia's servant." Tali's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. "It's not that simple. You're already changing, Jero. I see it in your eyes, in the way you move. The sea has claimed a part of you, and it won't let go easily. You've made a powerful enemy today, and it won't be satisfied until it has what it wants." Jero turned his gaze toward the horizon, the land stretching out before him. The Amati had been freed from their enemies, but he knew the true battle was only just beginning. He had to keep control over his own soul, or the sea would take it from him, just as it had taken Nia's. "I'll find a way to balance this," he said, his voice low but determined. "I will protect my people, and I will never surrender to the ocean's will." Tali studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "The sea is not easily ignored, Jero. It is as old as the earth itself, and it has claimed many before you. But if anyone can withstand it, it is you. You have the strength of the land in you. Just remember that you are not alone. You have your people, and you have me." Her words offered him a semblance of comfort, but deep down, Jero knew that his battle was far from over. The waves would always be there, whispering in his ear, trying to lure him back to the depths. And with every step he took, he would be walking a fine line between victory and destruction. As the days passed, Jero focused on rebuilding his kingdom. His warriors had fought valiantly, but there were still rival clans to contend with, and Sumi was a constant threat. His half-brother had not forgiven him for returning, and Jero knew that Sumi would stop at nothing to see him fall. Jero's mind was constantly occupied with the future. The people of the Amati needed him. They had suffered for so long under weak leadership, and now, under his command, they had hope. But that hope was fragile, and it would take more than just strength to keep it alive. He would need to unite the clans, to make them see that they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. But even as he led his people, the whispers of the sea continued to haunt him. Nia's voice was ever present, calling to him from the depths, reminding him of the power she had granted him. It was tempting, so tempting. But Jero resisted, though he could feel his resolve slipping with each passing day. One night, as he sat by the fire, deep in thought, a figure approached him. It was Mara, his most trusted warrior and confidant. She had been with him since the early days of his exile, and her loyalty had never wavered. "Jero," Mara said quietly, her voice tinged with concern. "Something is wrong. The people are whispering. They fear that the ocean has taken hold of you." Jero looked up at her, his eyes weary. "Let them fear. They don't understand." Mara shook her head. "It's more than fear, Jero. They sense something. You've changed. You're not the same man who left the Amati all those years ago. And they're afraid that you've made a deal with the sea that you can't break. Jiro sighed, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his choices. I haven't made any deals, Mara. I'm still the same man. I will never abandon my people. But even as he spoke, doubt lingered in his heart. He could feel the tug of the ocean once more, the pull of Nia's magic that seemed to wrap itself around him like a cloak. The sea had not finished with him yet. And he knew that, one way or another, the price would be paid. The question now was whether he could keep his people safe, even as the ocean's whispers grew louder. And would he be able to resist them, or would the tide take him, just as it had taken so many others before him? The days that followed were filled with uneasy silence. Jiro had successfully quelled the immediate threats to his kingdom, but his victory felt hollow. The land was quiet, but the restless whispers of the ocean echoed in his mind, louder with each passing day. He tried to drown them out with his duties, by leading his warriors to victory in small skirmishes, but the weight of the sea's power grew heavier. Nia's presence, though distant, lingered in the corners of his mind. It was as if her voice had become a part of him, a constant murmur beneath his thoughts. He could no longer tell where his own desires ended and the pull of the ocean began. The power she had given him felt like a gift and a curse, both at once. Every victory he claimed, every time his warriors cheered his name, he could feel her fingers tightening around his soul, urging him toward the sea. He was not alone in his struggle, though. Mara, ever loyal, had become increasingly concerned. She had watched the transformation in Jiro with a growing sense of dread. The man she had known, a strong, decisive leader, a warrior of the land, was slipping away, replaced by someone whose thoughts seemed distant, consumed by something that wasn't entirely human. She saw the way he sometimes stared out at the sea, lost in a trance, as if calling to it. She saw the flicker of unease in his eyes when they spoke of the future, of their people's safety. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the land, Mara confronted Jiro. The sky was a deep orange, the air thick with the promise of a coming storm. She stood before him, her posture strong but her voice soft with concern. Jiro, she said, you've changed. I can feel it in the air, in the way you carry yourself. This power you've gained from the sea, it's not just yours anymore, is it? Jiro turned to her, his face clouded with a mixture of guilt and determination. I'm still the same, Mara. I'm just different now. I have to be. For our people. For the Amati. Mara stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. This isn't about the Amati anymore, Jiro. It's about you. About your soul. I've seen the way you look at the water. I've heard you speak her name in your sleep. You're being consumed by it. Jiro's breath caught in his throat. Mara's words were a blow, striking deep into a place he had refused to acknowledge. He had known, somewhere inside, that he was losing himself, but hearing it aloud made the truth undeniable. It's not like that, Jiro replied, though his voice faltered. I made a choice, Mara. A choice to protect our people. The sea gave me strength when I needed it. I need to keep this power to lead them. Mara's expression softened, but there was no hiding the sadness in her eyes. But at what cost, Jiro? The sea isn't just a tool you can control. It doesn't give without taking. You've already given so much of yourself to it, and you don't even realize it. You're becoming someone else. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind stirring the trees. Jiro's thoughts were a whirlwind, his heart torn between his loyalty to his people and the pull of the ocean's power that was starting to feel like a part of his very being. He wanted to deny Mara's words, to tell her that he was in control, but deep down, he knew she was right. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out, gripping Mara's arm. I'm trying to keep it together, Mara. I swear I am. But, it's harder than I thought. The ocean. Nia's power, it wants me to stay with her. To rule beside her in the depths. Mara's gaze softened, and she placed her hand over his. I understand, Jiro. I understand more than you think. But I won't lose you to this, not without a fight. Jiro nodded, his throat tight. I don't want to be lost. I don't want to abandon my people, my land, for the sea. But every day, it's harder to resist. The power it gives me, the way it makes me feel, strong, untouchable, it's like nothing I've ever known. Mara squeezed his hand, her voice firm. Then you have to choose, Jero. You can't have both. The sea will take more than you're willing to give, and once it has you, there's no turning back. Jero's heart sank. He had always known that his bond with Nia would come with a price, but hearing it from Mara made it all the more real. He had thought he could control the ocean's magic, but now he understood that it was never meant to be controlled. The ocean was a force of nature, a vast, untamable power that could never be subdued. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, Jero felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. His people needed him. They had fought too long for freedom, for a chance at peace. But what good was peace if he lost himself in the process? We'll figure this out, Jero said, his voice low and resolute. Together. I won't let the sea take me. I won't let it take us. Mara nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. Then we'll fight it. We'll find a way to sever the bond between you and Nia. We'll make sure you stay Jero, the warrior who leads the Amati, not someone's puppet. But even as they spoke, a sense of foreboding lingered in the air. The storm was coming, and not just the one in the sky. Jero could feel the shifting tides, the growing power of the sea that was rising within him, threatening to break free. That night, as the winds howled and the rain began to fall, Jero stood at the edge of the sea, staring out into the vast, dark waters. The ocean whispered to him, a soft, seductive call that beckoned him to return to its depths. He closed his eyes, his breath steady as he fought to silence the voice of Nia. But deep inside, he knew that the battle for his soul had only just begun. The night was thick with the sound of the storm. The waves crashed against the shore with a fury that matched the turmoil inside Jero's heart. He stood at the water's edge, his clothes heavy with rain, his face wet from the downpour, yet it felt as if the water itself was calling to him. Jero, the voice was soft, a whisper carried by the wind, but he heard it clear as day. Nia's voice. His heart raced as he turned, but there was no one there. Only the endless sea, stretching out before him, its surface swirling in the violent storm. You know you belong to me, Nia's voice echoed again, closer this time, as if the sea itself were speaking to him. Jero took a step back, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He could feel the ocean's pull, the intoxicating power that it promised. The power to control everything. The power to never be weak, never be vulnerable again. But at what cost? You have all that you need, Jero, Nia continued, her voice now a melody, soothing and haunting all at once. With me, you will rule not just the land, but the seas themselves. You will never be alone. Together, we will be unstoppable. Jero's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the warmth of the ocean, the call of the depths, urging him to surrender. But deep down, a small part of him, his humanity, his will, fought to hold on. I don't belong to you, Nia, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I belong to the Amati. To my people. Nia's laughter was like the sound of crashing waves. Your people cannot save you, Jero. They cannot give you what I can. Come to me. Let go of your mortal chains. Embrace your true power. Jero stood still, the storm raging around him, the voice of the sea growing louder in his ears. But he knew one thing, if he gave in now, if he allowed himself to be consumed by the ocean's magic, there would be no turning back. He had to make a choice. He could remain a man of the land, a leader of his people, or he could embrace the sea's power and become something else, something darker, something lost. Jero closed his eyes, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. The sea's call was deafening now, the temptation almost too much to bear. But he knew what he had to do. With a final breath, Jero turned away from the water, the storm's fury still crashing behind him. The choice was made. But would it be the right one? The winds howled, the rain fell, and the sea waited, patient and ever-present. The battle was far from over. The days following Jairo's defiant stand against the ocean were filled with an eerie calm. The storm that had raged on the night he turned from the sea had miraculously quieted, but the internal tempest within him refused to be silenced. Every step he took felt heavy, every decision weighed down by the choice he had made to reject Nia's offer. He had returned to the Amati with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to lead them through the growing turbulence that threatened to engulf the land. But even as he rode with his warriors, the weight of the ocean's magic still hung over him like a shadow. Mara noticed the change, the subtle tension in Jairo's movements, the way his eyes sometimes wandered to the horizon, as if the sea still beckoned him. The bond he had forged with Nia had not been broken completely. No matter how much Jairo denied it, the mermaid's power had already entwined itself with his soul. One evening, as the last of the daylight faded from the sky, Mara found Jairo standing at the edge of the village, staring out over the land. He was alone, lost in thought, as he often was these days. Mara approached him quietly, her footsteps soft against the earth, but when Jairo turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "Jairo," she began softly, "we need to talk. About the way you've been. About what's really happening to you." He looked at her, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the village walls. For a moment, there was a flicker of something unfamiliar in his gaze, a coldness, a detachment that had not been there before. "I know what you're going to say, Mara," Jairo replied quietly, his voice almost hollow. "I can feel it, too. I'm not the same. But I'm trying to be the man I was, the leader you knew. I'm trying, I swear." Mara stepped closer, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Jairo, it's more than that. You've always been strong. But this power from the sea, it's changing you. It's not just about strength anymore, it's about control. And it's slipping away from you." Jairo clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I can't afford to let go of it. You don't understand, Mara. I've seen what happens when I'm weak. When I'm not strong enough. The Amati will fall again. Our people will be destroyed." Mara placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him, bringing him back from whatever dark place his mind had wandered to. "You don't have to carry it alone, Jairo. You never have. You've built something strong here, with your people, with us. We stand with you." Jairo looked down at her hand, the warmth of her touch pulling him back into himself, but his eyes were full of doubt. "And what if it's not enough? What if I'm not enough? What if the sea is the only thing that can protect us?" Mara's gaze softened. "The sea cannot protect us, Jairo. It can only control us. You've already given it so much. Don't give away your soul. Not for power, not for anything." For a long moment, Jairo remained silent, his face a mask of conflict. He wanted to believe Mara. He wanted to believe that his people, his warriors, could be enough to protect the land. But the lure of the ocean, the promise of unimaginable strength, it was too great to ignore. "I'm scared, Mara," Jairo admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what I'll become if I lose this power. I'm scared of what will happen if I let go of it." Mara nodded, her heart aching for him. "You're not alone, Jairo. We're here. The strength you need has always been within you. Don't let the sea define you. Let us help you find the man you were meant to be." Jairo closed his eyes, his breath shaky. For a moment, he almost believed her, almost thought that he could turn away from the ocean's call for good. But deep down, something tugged at him, a dark whisper from the depths, reminding him of the power he had once tasted, and the fear of losing it forever. As the night wore on, Jairo found it impossible to escape the pull of the ocean. He could feel Nia's presence in his mind, as if she were waiting, watching. He had rejected her once, but he knew she would not let him go so easily. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. The peace Jairo had fought so hard to secure began to unravel. The rival clans, sensing weakness in the Amati leadership, began to push harder, testing the limits of Jairo's power. The land once again teetered on the edge of chaos, and the burden of command weighed heavier with each passing day. It was during one of these tense moments, as Jairo prepared for a crucial battle against the Yumo tribe, that Nia's voice pierced his thoughts once more. This time, it was not a whisper, but a clear, commanding call that left him no room for doubt. "Jairo," Nia's voice echoed in his mind, her tone both alluring and demanding. "You fought long enough. Your people have been saved, but they will not understand your true strength. You are mine. Come to the sea. Come to me, and I will give you power beyond imagination. You will never have to fight alone again." Jairo froze, his grip tightening on his sword. The temptation was unbearable, and for a moment, he almost gave in. The power he had been seeking, the strength to protect his people, Nia could give him that and more. He could feel the ocean rising within him, calling him back. But just as the darkness seemed to take hold, Mara's face flashed in his mind. Her words echoed in his heart, "Don't lose yourself, Jairo. Don't give away your soul." With a shudder, Jairo pushed the voice away, forcing himself to focus. But even as he did, the sea's influence grew stronger. He could feel the bond between him and Nia tightening, pulling him closer to the water's edge, to the promise of ultimate power. In the distance, he could hear the sound of the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore. The time had come for Jairo to make a choice that would determine not only his future, but the future of the Amati and everything he had fought for. But would he choose his people, or the sea? Would he stand firm, or would he fall beneath the ocean's sway? As the moon rose high above the horizon, casting its silvery light over the land, Jairo took one last look at the village he had sworn to protect. His heart ached with the weight of his decision. The storm was coming, not just from the skies, but from within him. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a pale light over the land, its glow faintly shimmering on the surface of the sea. Jairo stood at the cliff's edge, staring out at the vast expanse of water, his heart torn between two worlds, two forces that sought to claim him. The sounds of the night were drowned by the constant pull of the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks far below, as if calling him, beckoning him to surrender to the sea's unyielding power. Jairo could feel the weight of Nia's presence, her power wrapped around him like an invisible chain, urging him to give in, to come to her. But Mara's words lingered in his mind, steady and true. "Don't lose yourself, Jairo. Don't give away your soul." He clenched his fists, feeling the deep, burning conflict within. He could feel the pulse of the ocean, its strength thrumming beneath his skin. It was a force like no other, a power that could sweep away all obstacles, crush his enemies, and give him the strength to rule the world. But in the same breath, it was a power that could consume him completely. Jairo closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time since he had accepted the mermaid's gift, he felt the weight of what he had become. He could still remember the days when he had been a simple prince, a son, unburdened by the weight of the ocean's power. But now he felt the darkness that had slowly crept into his soul, the coldness that had begun to twist his thoughts and actions. He turned his gaze back toward the village, the flickering lights in the distance serving as a reminder of the people who depended on him. The Amati were his people, the people he had fought for, the people he had sacrificed everything for. But at what cost? Sumi's face flashed in his mind, the betrayal, the lies, the endless scheming. The usurper who had taken his place as chief, who had driven him away in the first place. He could still feel the sting of being cast aside, left for dead. And now, even with his power, Jairo was still fighting to reclaim what was rightfully his. But at what cost? Was it worth it to destroy his humanity, to sacrifice his soul, just to reclaim the throne? Nia's voice returned to him, soft and persuasive. "Jairo, you have seen the truth. You are not meant to be king. You are meant to rule the seas, to reign over all. Come to me, and I will make you stronger than any man. Together, we will be unstoppable." For a moment, Jairo felt the lure of her words. He could see himself as she had promised, immortal, powerful, with the strength of the ocean at his command. His enemies would fall before him. The Amati would rise to greatness, and no one would ever dare challenge him again. But then his thoughts turned to Mara. Her unwavering loyalty, her gentle strength. She had stood by him when no one else would. She had believed in him, even when he could no longer believe in himself. And in that moment, Jairo realized something profound: it wasn't power he needed. It was connection. It was the people who stood by him, who believed in him. They were the ones who had made him strong, not the magic of the sea. "I am not yours, Nia," Jero whispered into the night. His voice was filled with resolve, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he was at peace with his decision. "I am not a king of the ocean. I am a son of the earth, and I will not let you take my soul." The winds howled as if in fury, and the ocean's roar grew louder, more insistent. Jero felt the magic surging within him, but this time he stood firm. He would not be controlled by the sea. He would not give up his humanity for power. Nia's voice, once so alluring, now turned cold and venomous. "You reject me, Jero. You choose them over me." Jero stood tall, his heart filled with a fire that no sea could quench. "I choose myself. I choose my people. I choose what is right." There was a long silence, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. Then, Nia's voice returned, darker and more menacing than before. "Very well, Jero. But know this, you have made an enemy of the sea. The price for your defiance will be great. The tide will rise, and the waves will swallow you whole." Jero didn't flinch. He knew the danger, but he also knew that he had made the right choice. The sea might be angry now, but it could not break him. The bond between him and Nia was severed, and no matter what she threatened, he would stand his ground. With a final, determined look at the ocean, Jero turned and walked away. He knew the path ahead would be filled with challenges, that Nia would not forget this betrayal easily. But he had made his choice, and he would face whatever came with the strength of his people beside him. Back at the village, Jero's return was met with mixed reactions. Some of the warriors who had once followed him now regarded him with suspicion, wondering what had happened to the men they had known. The stories of his time with the sea had spread, and the power he had gained from Nia was no secret. They whispered about him in the shadows, unsure of who he truly was anymore. But Mara, ever steadfast, stood by him, refusing to let the rumors sway her loyalty. "You are the same Jero, the men who led us to victory, who fought for our freedom. Don't let anyone take that from you." But Jero knew that the battle was far from over. Sumi's forces were growing stronger, and now, with Nia's threat hanging over him, he had more enemies than ever before. The rival clans were already gathering, sensing weakness in the Amati leadership. And Jero knew that the ocean itself might soon rise against him. The storm that had threatened for so long was finally coming. Jero could feel it in his bones. But this time, he would face it head-on. He would not let the sea, or the usurper, take his birthright. As the sun set over the land, casting a fiery red glow over the horizon, Jero gathered his warriors. His voice was steady, his resolve unshakable. "Tomorrow, we fight," he declared. "Not just for our land, but for everything we stand for. The sea will not claim us. The rival clans will not break us. And I will not be swayed by anyone. Together, we stand." The warriors cheered, their spirits lifted by his words. But deep in his heart, Jero knew that the battle ahead would not just be against the clans that sought to destroy him, it would be against the very power he had once embraced. The tide was rising, and the storm was about to break. Jero had made his choice, but now he would have to face the consequences. The dawn arrived with a heavy, oppressive stillness that settled over the Amati village. The once peaceful land now felt charged, as if nature itself could sense the coming clash. The winds had picked up overnight, sending gusts of air through the trees, their leaves shaking like a warning. Jero stood at the village's edge, gazing out toward the horizon where dark clouds had gathered on the horizon. The sea, once so inviting and full of power, now felt like an unknown threat, a vast, untamed force beyond his control. He had turned his back on Nia, but in doing so, he had unwittingly made a new enemy, a force that could very well bring ruin to everything he had fought for. Beside him, Mara stood silently, her eyes scanning the sky. She had remained by his side, despite the whispers of doubt and fear that now followed him like shadows. The weight of the coming battle pressed heavily on her, but she was resolute. Jero had always been more than a leader to her, he had been her hope, her reason for believing in something greater. She would not abandon him now. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but with a trace of concern. Jiro nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I have to be. We don't just fight for land or power. We fight for everything the Amati stand for. For the future we deserve." Mara's gaze softened. "And for the soul you refuse to give up." Jiro's hand clenched around the hilt of his sword. The words stung, but they were the truth. He had walked the fine line between the mortal world and the world of magic, and now, there was no turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, but the fire within him had been reignited. He would fight for his people, not for vengeance, but for the legacy of the Amati. The warriors had gathered, forming a silent circle around Jiro. Their faces were hard, determined. Each one had their own reasons for fighting, but together, they were a unified force, bound by the loyalty they had for their true leader. Jiro's presence alone gave them hope, and with every passing day, they had come to see him not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of resilience. The tension in the air was palpable. Sumi's forces were massing, and Jiro knew that time was running out. He couldn't delay any longer. The battle for the Amati would soon begin. As Jiro turned to address his warriors, a sudden roar of thunder rumbled through the sky, as if the heavens themselves were joining the fray. The air grew heavy, thick with the promise of rain. The warriors braced themselves, but Jiro raised his hand, silencing them. His voice rang out, calm and steady despite the storm that raged above. "We are the Amati," he cried, his voice carrying through the village. "We are the ones who fought and bled for this land. We will not let it fall to traitors and thieves. Today, we take back what is ours." The warriors responded with a cheer that sent a surge of energy through the camp. They were ready. Together, they would face whatever came. As Jiro and his warriors moved out, the storm grew fiercer. Rain began to fall in torrents, a cold, stinging shower that soaked their clothes and pelted their skin. The sea churned angrily in the distance, as if waiting for the first strike. Jiro's mind, however, was fixed on the task ahead. The battle was only part of the struggle. It was the aftermath that worried him. If they were victorious, what would become of the Amati? Would they ever truly be free of the darkness that threatened to consume them? The power he had gained from Nia was a gift, yes, but it came at a cost. A cost that he might not yet fully understand. The Amati forces reached the battlefield at the foot of the cliffs, where the rival clans had already assembled, ready for battle. Jiro stood at the front, flanked by Mara and his most trusted warriors. Across from them, Sumi stood tall, his face cold and unyielding. His forces were well armed, their eyes filled with the same hunger for power that had driven him to betray his own blood. Jiro's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. This battle was not just for the leadership of the Amati, it was for the soul of his people. If he failed now, the Amati would fall into chaos, forever lost to the whims of traitors and usurpers. Sumi's voice rang out across the field, his words cutting through the heavy rain. "Jiro, you should have stayed in exile. You are not fit to lead us. You are weak, nothing but a puppet for the sea's dark power. Your place is not here, it is in the depths, where you belong." Jiro stood firm, his eyes locked on his half-brother. "You are wrong, Sumi. You sold your soul for power, and now you stand before me, a traitor to everything we have fought for." The rival clans shifted uneasily, uncertain about who to follow. The tides of leadership were shifting, and they could feel it. With a sharp command, Jiro led his warriors forward, his battle cry echoing through the storm. The two forces collided with a deafening roar, the sound of steel clashing and warriors shouting filling the air. Jiro fought with the strength of 1,000 men, his sword a blur as he cut through the ranks of Sumi's forces. But as the battle raged on, he could feel something deep within him beginning to stir. The magic of the sea pulsed beneath his skin, urging him to let go, to embrace the power that could crush everything before him. The more he fought, the more the pull of the ocean grew stronger. He could hear Nia's voice calling to him, sweet and insistent. "You are my king, Jiro. Let go of your humanity. The power of the sea is within you. You are unstoppable." But Jiro shook his head, clearing the voice from his thoughts. He had made his choice. The power of the sea could not claim him again. Despite the rain and the chaos around him, he fought on, his warriors following his lead. With every strike, every movement, they grew stronger. They fought for him, for their future, for the hope of a peaceful Amati tribe. And then, in the midst of the battle, Jiro saw it, Sumi, standing atop a hill, his eyes burning with rage. His forces were faltering, but he would not give up so easily. The moment of truth had arrived. Jiro knew this battle would not end with just a sword. It would end with a choice, a final confrontation that would determine the fate of the Amati tribe, and perhaps, even the fate of the sea. As Jiro made his way toward his half-brother, the ground shook beneath him, and the storm above grew louder, as if the earth and sky themselves were holding their breath for what was about to come. The rain was relentless, coming down in torrents, as if the heavens themselves were weeping. The battlefield had turned into a treacherous swamp of mud and blood, each step taken with caution, lest it be your last. The sound of steel clashing, warriors shouting, and the roar of thunder above drowned out the world around Jiro as he made his way towards Sumi. The sight of his half-brother standing defiantly atop the hill was like a beacon, drawing Jiro in. Sumi's once youthful face was now twisted with the lines of bitterness and anger, the same face that had once been a symbol of shared childhood memories now a reflection of betrayal. Jiro's steps were deliberate, his sword gripped tightly in his hand, his heart beating not just for battle, but for something greater, justice, redemption, and the future of his people. The distance between them closed, and as Jiro neared the hill, Sumi's voice rang out, sharp and bitter, cutting through the chaos of the battle. Jiro. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Sumi's eyes blazed with fury. You were nothing. A child of shame. You have no right to lead the Amati. The people follow me now, not you. Jiro's face was expressionless, but inside, his heart ached. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt, it was the realization of how far Sumi had fallen, how far his own blood had strayed from their shared heritage. You chose power over family, Sumi. You let your greed cloud everything we once were, Jiro said quietly, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. You've broken the bond between us, and for what? To rule a shattered tribe. Sumi's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. You think you can change anything now? The people have already chosen me. They will bow to me, and so will you. Jiro took another step forward, his sword raised, and his eyes locked onto Sumi's, unwavering. I will never bow to you. And the Amati will never bow to anyone who seeks power through lies and betrayal. The wind howled around them, sending rain spraying in every direction as Sumi raised his own sword, a dark gleam in his eyes. Then you will die here, brother. You'll die, just like the false king you are. Jiro's grip tightened on his blade. He could hear Nia's voice in the back of his mind, beckoning him to embrace the power of the sea. But he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand, on his people, on his birthright, on what was truly important. With a single, swift motion, Sumi lunged forward, his sword aimed at Jiro's chest. The strike was quick, but Jiro was faster. He sidestepped with ease, his own sword cutting through the air in a sweeping arc. The clash of steel rang out, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through the air. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still, and then the battle raged around them once more. Jiro's movements were fluid, precise. He had trained for years, fought for years, and now, all his experience and power came to bear against his half-brother. Sumi was strong, but Jiro had something his brother didn't, purpose. The Amati people had chosen him long before this moment, and now, it was time to reclaim that trust. Sumi growled with frustration as he swung his sword again, his strikes becoming more erratic. You think they love you, Jiro? They fear you. You're nothing but a puppet for the sea. Your power isn't real. Jiro's eyes flickered with a hint of doubt, but it was only for a moment. He would not be swayed. He had made his choice. My power is mine, Sumi. The sea gave me strength, but it does not own me. In one fluid motion, Jiro disarmed Sumi, knocking his brother's sword from his hand. Sumi stumbled back, panting, his eyes wild with disbelief. This is where it ends, Sumi, Jiro said, his voice filled with both sorrow and resolve. I won't let you drag our people into darkness any longer." Sumi's face contorted with rage. He dropped to his knees, his hands raised in a futile plea for power. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to have nothing. The sea, Nia's power, was my only chance. I couldn't let you take it from me." Jairo's heart sank. There, on the battlefield, before him, knelt his brother, the man who had once been a part of him, now broken by his own choices. Jairo lowered his sword, not out of mercy, but because he knew that Sumi had already lost. Not just the battle, but himself. "I didn't take anything from you, Sumi," Jairo said softly. "You gave it all away when you chose betrayal over honor." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the storm above seemed to reach its crescendo, as though nature itself was releasing its fury upon the world. Sumi's defeated form trembled, but the sound of a distant horn broke through the tension. The battle was not over. Jairo's warriors were still fighting, and Sumi's remaining forces were rallying under his command. But the clash between the two brothers had been the turning point. Jairo's eyes flickered toward his warriors, then back at Sumi. There was no time to dwell on their past. The Amati needed him. His people needed him. "Stay down, Sumi," Jairo said. "This isn't your fight anymore." Sumi's gaze was filled with a mix of defiance and resignation. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Jairo turned his back on his half-brother and raised his sword high, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "This is for the Amati. This is for the future." The warriors behind him responded with a unified roar, and the battle resumed, fiercer than ever. Jairo's heart beat for more than just victory, it beat for redemption. For his people, for the land, for the soul of the Amati tribe. The war was far from over, but the path forward was now clearer. As Jairo fought on, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a tall, shimmering shape that moved with the grace of the waves themselves. Nia. Her voice echoed in his mind once more, soft, seductive, filled with both promise and warning. "You cannot escape me forever, Jairo. The ocean will claim what it is owed." Jairo steeled himself against her call, pushing forward into the fray. His destiny, he now knew, was not bound to the sea. It was bound to the people who had believed in him when no one else had. And as the final clash of the battle drew near, Jairo realized that this was only the beginning of the true struggle, one that would define not just his reign, but the fate of the Amati and the very balance of power between land and sea. The storm raged on, but Jairo's heart was clear. He would fight for his people, no matter the cost. And no matter who, or what, stood in his way.